subscribe and click the bell icon to turn on notifications.
We've made the accompanying exercise files for this tutorial available for free. Just click the link below in the video details to get these.
Hello everyone and welcome to this course on Visio 2019. My name is Deb and I'm your instructor on this course. And I've been using Visio for many years, both in some of the work that I've done and also in a personal context. Now I'm sure you're keen to get started with this course, but before we do, I need to cover some important introductory material with you, both about the edition of Visio that we're going to be using and also the structure of this course. So first, let's talk about who this course is for. Well, I've tried to structure this course in a way that's suitable for beginners, but also useful for people who have used an earlier version. I will say though that if you have used a reasonably recent but earlier version of Visio, there might be certain lessons in this course that you can skip. However, if you are an absolute beginner, then don't worry, we're going to be starting from scratch, but I will be making some assumptions. I'm going to assume that you're reasonably familiar with the Windows interface, so I won't be explaining how to use Windows or what dialogues are, things like that. I am largely going to assume that you've used the Office ribbon interface in other products, so you might be more familiar with the ribbon in products such as Word, Excel, PowerPoint, or even Outlook. If you're not familiar with it, then don't worry because I am going to cover that in a separate section. Now I should also point out that if your experience is with Visio 2010 or earlier, then chances are you will need to cover a lot of this course, as 2010 is when that ribbon was introduced, so the version we use now looks very different to those much older versions. Even if you have used 2010, there were a lot of changes in Visio in 2013. So the leap from 2010 to where we are currently is a pretty big one. Now, saying that, the jump from 2013 to Visio 2016 and then 2019 is not such a big leap. There are some cosmetic changes and a bit of enhanced functionality, but generally there's not too much difference at all. Now, if you are completely new to Visio, you might not even know what Visio is. Well, it's basically a diagram tool. We're going to use it to draw diagrams, or what are sometimes known as drawings. However, over its history, and it's about 25 years old now, it has developed beyond only being a diagram tool. For example, you can do things like model processes with it, and you can also use it for things like data visualization. Now, all of these aspects will be covered in this course, but if you would like some introductory reading so that you have more of an idea of what Visio is all about, then it is worth jumping onto the Microsoft.com website and just having a little read through these different sections. Now, I would like to point out with these pages on the Microsoft websites, they do tend to update these pages fairly frequently. So what you're seeing on my screen now might be entirely different if you're viewing this course in 6 months, a year's time. So just be aware of that. Now, another page that is sometimes really useful to check out is the Visio blog. This is where you'll find a lot of the latest information related to Visio, and it really helps you keep on top of all the different changes. And it also means that you can see comments underneath the blogs, which can sometimes be really useful if you're looking for a particular piece of information or trying to find a resolution to a problem. Another useful place on Office.com is the Visio Help Center. So not only does this give you access to help, but it also links you through to Microsoft training courses about the use of Visio. Now, the training materials on Office.com tend to be less detailed than the course that we're going to cover, and I also tend to cover a wider range of aspects of functionality. But there is some really useful stuff on here. If you look down at trending topics, for example, if you weren't sure how to create a basic flowchart, there is a link for that just here. And that's going to link you through to an instructional guide and a step-by-step process of how to do this. So loads of information in this help center. Now, throughout this course, I'm going to be using Visio 2019 Professional, the desktop version. Now, aside from Professional, there is also a Visio Standard version. Now, if you have Visio Standard, then most things on this course you're going to be able to cover no problem, but there are a small number of things that you won't have in your version. But as I said, it is very, very minimal, just a couple of little items, so you should still be able to work through this course without too much issue. Now, one other thing to note, despite the fact that I am in the UK, as you can probably tell from the accent, I'm going to be using US locale when working in Visio. So that means that things like currency, date, and spelling will all be in US format. Now, all of the files that you see me use in the demo videos are available for you to download from the course files folder, so you can follow along. And throughout this course, there will be a number of exercises where you can practice the skills you have learnt so far. And you'll find all of the files that you need to complete these exercises in the exercises folder. So make sure you download all of the files prior to starting the course. And if you ever get a little bit confused as to which file I'm using, remember, just look up in the title bar of the Visio drawing in the video and you should see the document title listed there. So with all that said, let's move on to the next lesson in this introductory section, where I'm going to briefly talk to you about how you can acquire Visio if you don't already have it. That's it for now. Once again, my name is Deb and I am absolutely thrilled to be hosting this course for you today. Hello everyone and welcome back to this course on Visio 2019. I'd like to start out by just running through how you can acquire Visio if you don't already have it on your PC. Because you might have noticed that if you are a Microsoft 365 subscriber, Visio isn't actually included in your package or your suite of applications. So if you do want to use it, you're going to have to pay for it and download it separately. And there are various different routes or ways that you can download this software. And it really depends if you want to purchase it as a subscription and pay a low monthly fee, or if you just want to buy outright as a one-time download. So let's take a look at the different options that we have. I've just loaded up a Microsoft Edge browser and I'm just going to type in Visio 2019 Professional Download. So let's first take a look at the different plans that you have when it comes to Visio. Now the two plans here are both subscription plans. One of them is limited to the web version only, and the other one allows you to download the full desktop app. So you could choose one of these options and buy it from the Microsoft website. Alternatively, if you just want to download the full application and have it on your PC, then you might be more interested in the Visio Standard 2019 download or the Visio Professional 2019. Now in this course, I'm going to be using Visio Professional simply because it has the full range of features. So if we click on this, let's take a look at what we have. So this is the full Visio Professional 2019 version, and you can see that this is quite an expensive product. Now, if you're just a home user and you need to create diagrams, then you may prefer to go for the Visio Standard 2019, which we have a link for just here. And you can see that whilst that is about half the price, it's still pretty expensive. Now, I will say that obtaining Visio from the Microsoft website is not your only option. There are plenty of third-party suppliers which offer product keys and downloads for Visio at a greatly reduced price. Now, I'm going to leave it up to you to do your own research, and I don't want to push certain websites on anyone, but I will say that a site that I use all the time for this type of download is a site called Brightsoft. I've downloaded many of the Microsoft applications from here, and you'll see that the price is a lot cheaper than the Microsoft website. So I definitely recommend that you do your own research, but whichever way you choose to download it, if you are going to go for a third-party installation, make sure that it is a reputable source. Now, when you do purchase a copy of Visio in this way, you're essentially purchasing a product key. So for example, when I purchased it from this website, I received an email that contained my product key number and instructions on how to download the software. And it basically involves clicking on a link which is going to take you to the Microsoft website, and then it's going to ask you to enter in your product key to download. And once you download, you're going to get something that looks like this, officesetup1.exe. Double click to run it and it's going to install Visio. Now, whilst you're going through the installation process, you might get a pop-up window that basically asks you to switch to the 64-bit version. And the setup process basically guides you through the installation of Visio. So it's reasonably straightforward. Now in this course, I'm using Visio 2019 Professional. I've already downloaded it onto my PC, so let's just check to make sure that it's installed correctly. I'm going to go down to my search bar at the bottom here, and I am using Windows 10, so if you're using Windows 8, 8.1 or something older, then this might be slightly different, but just go down to where you would normally go to search for your applications, type in Visio, and if it's installed, you should see it sitting there right at the top of your list. And it's from this point that we're going to pick up the next lesson. I'm going to show you how you can launch Visio, how you can make it easily accessible from your taskbar, and also introduce you to the start screen. So I'm going to head over there now, and I look forward to you joining me. Hello everyone and welcome back to the course. Now we've seen how we can acquire or download Visio 2019 onto our PCs, we're now going to take a look at launching Visio, and I'm going to just guide you around the start screen, which is basically the first screen that opens when you launch Visio. Now, as I said, I'm using Windows 10. So in order to open Visio, I'm going to go down to my search bar at the bottom and just type in Visio. So I can see it there at the top of my list. And all I need to do is click to launch it. However, before I do that, I want to make my life a little bit easier when I'm launching Visio in the future. Because I don't really want to have to come into the Start menu, search for the application in order to load it up. I want to make it super simple to open. Now there's a couple of ways that I can do that. If I right click on my application, you can see I have a couple of options in there, pin to start and pin to taskbar. So I can pin this application to my start screen, and I can also pin it to the taskbar. And the taskbar is the bar that you can see running across the bottom of my screen that currently has lots of other applications that I use frequently pinned to it. So I'm going to say pin to taskbar. And you can now see the icon has appeared, and I'm just going to move that across. But what I can also do, if I just quickly search for it again, is right click and say pin to start. So what that means is that whenever I click my start icon in the corner, you can see that I have Visio listed just here. Now you don't have to pin to both start and the taskbar, you can choose one or the other depending on what suits you best. So now that I've pinned it, I can click to open. And when you first open up Visio, it's going to jump you into the start screen. And if this is a brand new download, as mine is, you might see the Microsoft Office activation wizard. So this just says, thank you for installing Microsoft Visio Professional. Activation is required to authenticate this copy of Microsoft Office. The wizard will guide you through the activation process. So I'm going to choose this option. I want to activate the software over the internet and click on Next. And very quickly, it just tells me that my copy is now activated. So I'm going to say close, and I can now see my start screen. Now this start screen is normally the first thing you see when you open up Visio. Now I will say that you can suppress this start screen if you want to, which means that when you launch Visio, you're not going to see this screen. It's just going to jump you straight into the main application. And I'm going to show you how you can suppress the start screen in a moment. Now, all the start screen really is a way of accessing recently opened drawings, other drawings, or creating new ones. And you can see right at the top here, underneath this new heading, we have various different diagrams or different blocks that we can load up. And these are really the most commonly used diagrams. So for example, if I decided that I wanted to create an organization chart, I can click on the relevant block, and it's going to pull up a panel that shows the available styles of this chart along with a short description. It also shows me a download size, so this is very small, and it lets me choose if I want to work with this chart in metric units or US units. And I'm going to work in US units for the duration of this course. So let's select this first one just here, which is the Organization Chart Wizard. So this is basically going to use a wizard to create diagrams for human resources management, staff organisation, office administration and management structures. Once I've selected my template, essentially, I can click on Create, and it's going to open it up in the main Visio interface. And you can see with this one, it's an organization chart wizard. And there are various different ways that you can create organization charts. For example, I can use information that's already stored in a file or database, or I can use information that I enter using the wizard. Now, I'm not going to walk you through this process at the moment because we're going to do a whole section on organization charts. So I'm going to cancel on this window. So currently what I have is just an empty organization chart. And what you can see in the title bar is that by default, this file has been called Drawing 1. Now, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to save this chart into the course files folder. Now, before I do that, I'm just going to add one shape onto my canvas. So I'm just going to drag this one here and place it into the middle, just so that we have something in this diagram. So now that I've done that, I'm going to save this drawing. So for this, we jump up to the File tab, which takes us into what we call the Backstage area. And Backstage is really where you'll find all of your admin style tasks. So this is where you come if you want to create new diagrams, if you want to open diagrams that you have stored locally. You can also save from here, you can print, you can share with other people, and even export your diagrams. Now we're going to look at this Backstage area in a lot more detail. That's really just a high-level overview of the kinds of things that you can see in here. Now for us at the moment, we want to save our Visio diagram, so I'm going to select Save As. And this is now going to present me with different locations which I can browse and search for folders. Now, because this is a new installation of Visio and I haven't used it yet, this is the first time I'm using it, you can see it says you have no recent folders. Now, as I start saving things into various different folders, these will appear on the right-hand side to make it a lot quicker for me to save into the same folders. So let's click on Browse, and I'm going to navigate to the Course Files folder. I'm going to give my drawing a name, so let's call this My First Org Chart. It's saving it as a Visio drawing file type, which is .vsdx. And all I need to do here is click on Save. And what you'll now see is if you look up in the title bar, that's now changed from the default of diagram 1 to my first org chart.vsdx. So I know that that's been saved successfully. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to close down Visio. And I can do that very simply by clicking the cross in the top right-hand corner. And that's going to close the entire application. Let's restart Visio using our icon on the taskbar. So now what you'll notice when that start screen opens up is that the last file that I created and saved is now listed under recent. So this makes it really quick and easy to find and open files that I've used recently. And the last drawing or diagram that you accessed is always going to be at the top of that list. So this list essentially is dynamic as it changes according to your activity. Now, it might be that you have specific diagrams that you access all the time, and you don't particularly want to have to scroll up and down a long list of files trying to find them. So what you can do is you can pin documents to the top of the list, which means they're always going to stay there no matter how many different files you open. Now, if you do want to pin any diagrams, it's a simple process of hovering over the file, and you'll see in the middle a little pin icon. And it says pin this item to the list. So I can click this and it's now pinned to the top of this list. You'll also see that you have another section just here which is going to show all of the items that you have pinned. So a really nice quick way of finding your most important drawings. Now I will say that there's only a certain amount of drawings that will appear in your recent list. And that's very much determined by what you have it set to in your Visio options. So I'm going to quickly jump into options, which you'll find right at the bottom in the menu on the left-hand side. And in options, you have a number of different pages. Now, if we jump into the advanced page and scroll all the way down, underneath display, you can see it says show this number of recent documents, and mine's set to 50. And if I hover over the information icon, it says show this number of recent documents. So I can hold 50. If I find that's a bit too many, I can take this down using these scroll arrows, or I can keep it at 50. And you'll notice that I can't go any higher than 50, so 50 is the maximum. Now, some of the other things that I can do within this start screen is I could click on Open, And this is going to allow me to open any drawings that I have saved. So once again, you can see underneath drawings, it's got my pinned drawing on the right-hand side. But if I need to open a drawing that maybe isn't listed in my recent list, then I can browse and pick that up from a different location. I can also create new drawings from here as well. So right at the top here, I have 3 new templates that I can use. I can choose the basic diagram, which is probably one of the most common, blank drawing, so I can build my own diagram from scratch. And then it's also showing me the organization chart, which is the last one that I used. And what you'll notice is that as I hover over these, they also have their own pin icon. So if I use an organization chart all the time, I can pin this to the front of the list as well. Then underneath there, we have various different templates available for us to load up. And there are many, many different templates available, including a selection online. So from here, you can search for specific templates. And underneath this search bar, you'll notice some suggested searches. So if I was looking for, let's say, a flowchart, I can click on the flowcharts link. It's going to search through the templates and pull back everything that's tagged as a flowchart. And I can then go in and choose whichever template I want to use. Now, if I want to get back to the previous screen, I have a little back arrow at the top here, which is going to take me back. Now, don't think that you're just limited to these suggested searches. You can search for your own template by typing in a keyword. So for example, if I type in the word project and hit the enter key, that's going to go away and search for all templates that are related or tagged with the word project. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to open, and we're going to open my first org chart once again. So all I need to do is double click, and that's going to open up in the main Visio interface. And what I'm actually going to do is resave this file as a different name. So let's go back up to File, which takes us into that backstage area, down to Save As. And what you'll now see in here is that this is no longer empty because I've saved a file. So now it's showing me the folders that I've saved into today. And once again, if I always use these folders, I can choose to pin these to the top of the list. Now I know that I'm going to be saving into the course files folder fairly frequently, so I'm going to click the drawing pin icon just to pin that to the top. So let's double click on this folder and let's save this as my second org chart and click on Save. You'll now see that the title changes to my second org chart, and I haven't overwritten the first one. The other file is still there. This is a brand new diagram. Now, when you've finished working within a diagram and you want to close it down, if you click on the cross in the top right-hand corner, you're basically going to close down all of Visio. And it might be that you just want to close down this particular file, but keep Visio open. So in order to do that, again, you go back to File to jump into that backstage area, and you'll notice in the menu right at the bottom, we have a Close option. So let's click it. It's going to close down that file, but it hasn't closed down Visio. Now, the final thing I want to show you in this lesson is something I mentioned right at the start, and that is how to suppress that start screen. So again, we're going to go back into File, and we're going to select Options at the bottom. Now, as I mentioned before, we have lots of different pages in here, and you'll find this option on the General page right at the bottom underneath the Startup Options group. So it says, show the start screen when this application starts. So I'm going to take the tick out of this box and click on OK, and I'm going to close down all of Visio. Let's reopen and see what happens. And you'll see now, instead of getting the start screen, it takes me directly into the application. So that might be something that you want to customize from the get-go. So that's a quick whistle-stop tour of the start screen and some of the functionality. That's it for this lesson. I will see you in the next one. Hello everyone and welcome back to the course. In this lesson, we're going to explore the ribbon. And if you've used other Microsoft products like Excel or Word or even something like Outlook, then you may be very familiar with the ribbon structure. And I will say that if you do know what the ribbon is and how it works, then you can probably skip this lesson. However, if this is the first time that you're coming across the ribbon, then stay tuned because we're going to find out all about it. Now the ribbon appears at the top of the window, and the ribbon structure was introduced in Visio in 2010, and it was actually slightly later than the other Microsoft products. And the ribbon basically contains numerous different tabs, and those tabs contain all of the commands that you need to work with Visio. And I will say that what you see on my ribbon might differ slightly to what you see on yours, because what you see and how it's laid out is very much dependent on things like your screen resolution and your screen size. Now you'll have all of the same commands available, they just might be organized slightly differently, so just bear that in mind. Another point worth noting is that the commands and ribbons that you see is very much dependent on the edition of Visio that you're using. So I'm using Visio Professional, which contains some commands that the standard Visio version doesn't contain. Now, as I mentioned, the ribbon is made up of a number of tabs, and you can see currently I'm clicked on the Home tab. I also have an Insert tab, a Draw tab, a Design tab, Data, Process, Review, View, and Help. And these tabs will appear and disappear depending on what you're doing. Now, if we just click on the Home tab, what you'll see is that your commands are divided down into different groups, and you can see the group name at the bottom. So we have, working from the left, clipboard, font, paragraph, tools, so on and so forth. And within the group, we have numerous different relevant commands. And these commands can take on various different formats. They might just be a button that you can click on. Some of these have drop-down lists. Some have things like radio buttons, scroll buttons, things like that. So they're not all exactly the same. Now, one thing you will notice is that currently all of my commands are disabled. So they're all showing in grey, and I can't actually click on anything. Now, the reason why they're all disabled at the moment is because I don't have a diagram or a drawing open. So let's do that first of all. I'm going to jump up to File, and I'm going to go down to Open. And helpfully, I have my first organization chart pinned to the top of my recent documents. So I'm going to click to open this. And you'll now see, if we jump back to that Home ribbon, that now all of my commands are available for me to use. What you'll also notice is that I now have an additional tab. And it's this one here, Org Chart. So as I've opened this, Visio has recognized that this is an organization chart template, and it's given me a specific ribbon related to this particular diagram type with all of the commands I'm going to need. And this particular ribbon also has its own groups with its own commands contained within. Now you will see that whilst most of these commands are now active, I still do have a few that are greyed out. So for example, in this picture group, whilst Insert is active, Change, Delete and Show Hide are greyed out. And that's because these require me to make a selection before I can use them. So if I now click on my shape, you'll see that they then become active. So I can now delete this shape, change it, or show hide. So your commands very much depend on where you're currently clicked. Now let's click on our shape that we have in here, and I'm going to jump across to the Home tab. Now it might be that I want to change the style of this shape, and you'll see right in the middle here I have a whole bunch of different shape styles. Now let me just move this over so you can see it underneath that gallery, and what you'll notice is that as I hover over these different styles and fill backgrounds, you can see that we get what we call a live preview. So I can see what this effect is going to look like on the shape before I actually apply it. So let's change the color of this shape. So live preview is something you'll see fairly frequently, and it's really useful because it just helps you make a decision before you actually apply it. Now let's move on to taking a look at another couple of really important controls. I'm going to jump across to the View tab and introduce you to this Zoom group. Because when you're working in Visio and you're doing things that are quite granular and you need to be very detail orientated and accurate, Zoom is going to be your best friend. It allows you to zoom in to your drawing and see things in greater detail. So if we click on Zoom, it's going to bring up this zoom box so you can choose your level of magnification. So what I could do here is maybe select 200% and click on OK, and it's going to zoom into my drawing to 200%. Let's click on Zoom again. So I'm going to click on 100%, which is the actual size, and I find that this is quite a nice size to work with. However, if you want to see the entire canvas, the entire drawing, you could choose the Fit to Window option. And there is a keyboard shortcut for this of Shift-Control-W. So let's click on Fit to Window, and you can see it fits the entire canvas into the space. You can also zoom in by page width, which means it's going to stretch that canvas across the entire width of the screen. Now for the time being, I'm just going to go back to Fit to Window. Another way that you can zoom into your diagram is by using the zoom slider at the bottom of the screen. So all the way over in the corner, you can see this little bar which allows you to zoom in and out of your diagram. So if I grab the zoom slider and drag it up, I can zoom into whatever percentage of magnification that I like. Now, another thing I might want to consider doing fairly early on is setting the orientation and also the paper size. Now, if we jump across to the Design tab, this is where you'll find your page setup options in this first group just here. So if I click the drop down underneath orientation, you can see that currently mine's set to landscape. But if I prefer to work in portrait, then I can simply select portrait from that drop-down menu, and it's going to resize my paper. Another thing that I would advise you to check is what you have set underneath this size option, because you may well want to work with drawings that are on the correct size of paper. So you can see that mine is currently set to letter size, which is the standard paper size in the US, whereas in the UK, where I'm from, we would be more likely to use A4 as our standard paper size. Now I'm going to choose letter, but wherever you're located, whatever paper you tend to print on, whatever paper you tend to use, make sure you have that set underneath this size option. Now, so far, we've just got one lonely object on our diagram. So let's add another shape. And if you take a look over in the left-hand side, you can see I have a shapes pane, and I can simply drag and drop any shapes onto my canvas. But I'm going to click more shapes at the top here, so I get a little pop-out menu. I'm going to go down to General, and I'm going to load up my basic shapes. So you can see once I do that, I get a completely new palette, essentially, of what Visio considers to be basic shapes that I can then add to my diagram. So I'm going to drag and drop just a very basic rectangle. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit so this is easier for you to see. Now, once again, I'm going to jump across to the Home tab, and this time I'm going to go to the Shape Styles group and select the Fill drop-down. And this is going to open up a palette of colours, and again you'll see as I hover over I get that live preview. Now the colours that you see in the top area here underneath the Theme Colours heading are controlled by the theme that you have applied. And I'm going to talk more about that a little bit later on in the course. And then at the bottom we have what we call standard colours. So let's just go in and select this gold orange fill. I'm then going to go back up to my shape styles, and this time I'm going to choose line, and this controls the outline of the shape. So I might want to do let's do a green colour, but you can see that that outline is very, very thin. I'm going to make that a little bit thicker by again clicking the line drop down, going to weight and selecting a much thicker line. So reasonably simple to format any shapes that you add to the canvas. Now something else I might want to add is a text box. So let's jump up to the Insert tab, and in general what you'll see on this tab are things that you can insert into your diagram. If we take a look at the text group on the end, we have a drop down for text box, and I can choose to draw a horizontal or a vertical text box. So I'm going to select horizontal. My cursor changes to a small cross, and then if I click and drag, I've essentially created a text box. My cursor is flashing, so let's just type text box. And what I can do from here is I can then go in and format this text. So let's select the text, and we find all of our formatting options on that Home tab. So in the font group just here, I'm going to change the font to, let's say, Britannic Bold. I'm going to increase the font size, so I can either choose something from this drop down, or I can increase the font size by clicking on this little A button. And you'll also see there is a keyboard shortcut for this of Shift-Control-. So I'm just going to use this button to make this text a little bit bigger. And I can also change the color of this text as well. So let's change that to a dark blue color. Click away to deselect the text box. So these are the typical kinds of operation that you might perform on shapes. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the commands that you see on these ribbons may vary depending on the screen resolution that you have. Now, fortunately, if you're not seeing all of the commands that I'm seeing, you can still access them from within Visio. So for example, if I click in this text box and just click to highlight that text, I can access all of the options that I have regarding font formatting by opening up the advanced dialog box for this particular group. And what you'll notice is that in the corner of some of these groups, you have a little diagonal arrow. So if I click on this one in the corner of the font group, it's going to open up my full range of font formatting options. So I can change the font from here, I can change the style if I want it to be bold or italic, I can change the size, and I can also do some additional things that I can't actually do from the ribbon. So these dialog box launchers basically contain all of the options, all of the commands for the group, even if you can't see them on the ribbon. So just be aware of that. Now, the final thing I want to talk about in this lesson is just making selections. Because one thing you will notice is that in order to perform an action on anything within a diagram, you need to select it first so Visio knows which one you want to perform the action on. So if I click on this rectangle, you can see that I get a selection box around the outside with these little circles, and these are referred to as resize handles. And as you can imagine, these resize handles allow you to resize your shape. So as I hover over, I get a diagonal arrow. I even get a little pop out that tells me that this is going to resize the shape. And I can just drag the corner out to make it larger or drag it in to make it smaller. I can use this one to drag down and drag up. You can also select single or multiple objects. So I have the rectangle selected, but if I also wanted to select the text box, if I hold down my control key and click, it's going to select both of them. And then any actions I apply are going to apply to both of these selected items. So if I jump up to fill, you'll see that as I hover over the palette, it's changing the background fill for both of the objects that I have selected. And if you want to deselect both of them, just click somewhere else on the canvas. Now it's also worth noting that you can have more than one drawing open at once. So I'm going to jump up to File and go down to New, and I'm just going to select Blank Drawing. Let's click on Create to open that up. Now, because I didn't close my last drawing down, the new drawing, Drawing 1, has opened up over the top. So if I want to switch quickly back to my organization chart, if I jump up to the View tab, you'll see we have a Switch Windows option in here. And this is going to list everything that you have open in Visio. And if you want to switch between charts, then you can just click on My First Org Chart, and it's going to switch you back to there. I can go to Drawing 1, so on and so forth. So the final thing I'm going to do here is switch back to this drawing I created, and I'm just going to close it down. That's it for this lesson. I will see you in the next one. Hello everyone and welcome back to the course. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the Quick Access Toolbar, and I'm going to show you how you can customize it. Now again, if you are used to using the Quick Access Toolbar in other Microsoft applications, then you can probably skip this lesson. However, if the Quick Access Toolbar is not familiar to you, then carry on watching. Now the Quick Access Toolbar is just a way for you to access commands that you use frequently quickly. So as we've seen, all of the commands are spread out across all of these different ribbon tabs. So in order to access a specific command, then you have to remember which ribbon it's on. And whilst that knowledge will come over time, when you're first learning Visio or Microsoft products in general, trying to remember which ribbon your commands are located on can be a bit time consuming. So you can make your life a lot easier by adding commands that you use frequently to the Quick Access Toolbar. Now, if you're wondering where this magical toolbar is, it's located right at the top of the screen in the top left-hand corner. And it's this little bar up here which has a few different icons on it by default. Now, let's first talk about the position of this toolbar. By default, you're going to find it shoved all the way in the top left-hand corner. Now, you might be completely happy with it there as it is quite out of the way, but if you would prefer this to be a little bit easier to access, a little bit more visible, you can move it to underneath your ribbons. And that's exactly what I'm going to do because I prefer to have it down here. So at the end of this quick access toolbar, you'll see a little drop down arrow. When you hover over it, it says Customize Quick Access Toolbar. And we're going to jump all the way down to the last option where it says Show Below the Ribbon. And now it's moved to here. Now, as I said, you don't have to do that. It's just my personal preference. Now, by default, you will have a number of different commands already on your quick access toolbar. So again, these are things that Microsoft has determined you're going to use frequently. So we have the Save button on here. We have the Undo button, which will undo the last action that you applied. And you'll notice that the Undo button also has a drop down so you can go back numerous different steps. And these are all the last steps that I have taken. We have a Redo button so you can repeat your last action. And then we also have a way of switching between mouse and touch mode. So if you are somebody who uses Visio on a touchscreen device, so maybe a laptop or even a tablet, you can switch into touch mode, which is basically going to give you a little bit more space between your commands to allow for your finger. Now, I'm working on a laptop and I'm going to use mouse mode. Now, what you can also do here is you can customize this quick access toolbar and add on to it any commands that you like. So again, if we click this drop down, you'll see that there are 10 or so items listed in this menu. And the ones that are currently ticked are the ones that I have on my quick access toolbar. And these are basically commands, again, that Microsoft have deemed most useful. So if you find yourself opening documents all the time or running a spell check all the time, you can click on spelling and add that command to your quick access toolbar. And this saves you from jumping across to the review tab and clicking on the spelling icon from there. Now, what you'll notice in this drop down is that there are only 10 commands. What if you want to add the bold command, or maybe the copy command, or the fill command, or something from another tab? Well, you can actually add anything you like to this quick access toolbar. And there are a couple of different ways that you can do this. Now, by far the easiest and quickest way is simply to hover over the command that you want to add. So in this case, I'm going to add copy. Right click your mouse and you'll see you have an option to add to the quick access toolbar. Very simple, very straightforward. I'm going to right click on bold and I'm also going to add that to the quick access toolbar. Maybe I find that I am constantly filling shapes with colour. I'm going to right click on the fill tool and I'm going to say add to quick access toolbar. So I can essentially build my own toolbar of commands that I access frequently to make my life a lot easier. Now, another thing that's worth bearing in mind is that not all commands that are available in Visio have an icon on the ribbons. So if you want to see the full list of commands, if you click the drop down and jump into more commands, it's basically going to take you into Visio Options and to the quick access toolbar page. Now, what you'll see on the right hand side is essentially your quick access toolbar and all of the commands that you currently have on it. And then on the left hand side, this is where you can choose other commands to add. And these commands are organized into different groups. So what I'm currently seeing here are all of the popular commands. However, if I wanted to see just the commands that are not located on any of the ribbons, I could choose to show the commands not in the ribbon. And this opens up a whole world of different commands that don't have icons on the ribbon. And if I want to add any of these to my quick access toolbar, all I need to do is select them and click on the add button in the middle to move them across. Let's select something else like edit background and click on add. If you want to show absolutely every command that's available in Visio, again, just select all commands. And all of these commands are listed in alphabetical order, so if you're looking for something specific, that makes it a lot easier. So I'm going to add some alignment tools. I'm going to select align center, align left, and also align middle. And when I click on OK, you'll see that they've all now been added to my quick access toolbar. So this is something I would advise that you do, and it might be something worth doing after you've been using Visio for a while so that you have a greater understanding of the things that you use most frequently. Now, the final thing I'm going to show you here is just how you can add a little bit of separation to the commands on the quick access toolbar. Because currently we really just have a long list of all the commands. They're all jumbled together and not really very well organized. So we can split these up using separators. So once again, I'm going to click the drop down and go into More Commands. Because what you'll see at the top here is something called Separator. So I'm going to add 3 separators just by clicking the Add button 3 times. And I'm going to organize my commands so they're a little bit more logical. So the first thing I'm going to do here is this touch mouse mode. I don't tend to use that very often, so I'm going to remove that from the quick access toolbar by clicking the Remove button in the middle. Now, spelling is something I tend to do last after my diagram is complete. So I'm going to use my arrow keys to move that all the way down to the bottom. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this first separator and I'm going to move it up and place it just after repeat fill color. I'm going to take my second separator, I'm going to move it up and I'm going to place it after these formatting commands. I'm going to take my third separator, I'm going to move it up to separate these 2 commands from my alignment tools. And I'm actually going to add one more separator and I'm going to move that down so that I have spelling separated as well. So now when I click on OK, take a look at my quick access toolbar, it's added in these separation lines just to give my commands a little bit more structure, and it allows me to group together commands of similar type. And of course, if at any time you decide that you want to remove a command from the quick access toolbar, it's a simple case of right clicking and you get a remove from quick access toolbar option. So I'm going to remove both of these, and you can also remove separators. Again, just right click and select remove. It's as simple as that. That's it for this lesson. I will see you in the next one. When working in Visio, it's really important that you understand the different types of menu that are available. So far in this course, we've predominantly been looking at commands that are on the ribbon, but there are also other ways for you to perform actions in your diagram, and that is by using contextual ribbons and contextual menus. Now, what are contextual menus and ribbons, and how do we access them? Well, it's fairly straightforward. If we click on one of the shapes, so I'm going to click on this text box, if you right-click your mouse on your selection, it's going to pop open a menu to the right-hand side. And I'm talking about this menu running down here. Now, the reason why these are called contextual menus is because they are directly related to whatever it is that you're clicked on. So these contextual menus will change depending on what item you have selected. So currently I have a text box selected, so I'm getting all of the options related to a text box. So I can cut, copy and paste this text box. I can group it with other objects. I can add containers. I can add hyperlinks and comments. I can edit the text. I can work with shape data, or I can format the shape. Now what you'll notice is that if I click away and click on this shape just here and right click, I get a very similar menu because these two are essentially both shapes. However, if I click on this item just here and right click, I get an entirely different contextual menu because this is a different type of shape. This is directly related to an organization chart, and so I get the relevant menu options. So just be aware that that right click menu changes depending on the item that you currently have selected. What you'll also notice is that if I was to right-click just somewhere on this blank canvas, I also get a contextual menu directly related to the canvas as opposed to a specific object or item on the page. Now, what you may also have noticed is that when I right-click, not only do I get a contextual menu, I get this little panel of icons just above. And this is what we call the mini toolbar. Now again, this is something that you can choose to turn off if you find it particularly annoying or not particularly helpful. But the idea of this mini toolbar is to give you quick access to some of the most common commands. So for example, formatting tools. I can increase the font size, change the text to bold, italic. I've got my format painter. I can change the shape. And all this is here for really is that, again, you don't have to waste time hunting through the different ribbons to try and access these commands quickly. Now, some people absolutely love this mini toolbar, others do not. So let me show you how you can disable this mini toolbar if you find it just gets in the way and you're not particularly using it. Now, as you can imagine, with anything like this, customizations, this is where we jump into our Visio options. So up to File to move us into the Backstage area, and all the way down at the bottom, we have Options. I'm going to click on the General page because the first option that we have underneath the User Interface options is Show Mini Toolbar on Selection. So I'm going to deselect this option and click on OK. Now, aside from contextual menus, we also have something called contextual ribbons. And these are ribbons that appear or disappear depending on what you've currently got selected. So let me show you a quick example of this. I'm going to go across to the Insert ribbon and I'm going to insert a container. And I'm just going to choose this container just here. And let's move that over very slightly. Now, because I have this container selected, if you take a look up at my ribbons, you can see that I now have a contextual ribbon called Container Tools with a Format sub-ribbon. Now, this is only showing because I'm currently clicked on the container, and I now have all of the different commands related to this specific object. So I have container styles that I can apply, heading styles, I can lock the container, everything is related to this object type. If I was to deselect, so click away, you'll see that that ribbon disappears. And if I click on something else, because it's not a container, I'm not getting that contextual ribbon. I don't get it back until I click back on the container. So again, just bear that in mind. Depending on what you've inserted, what you're clicked on, you may see ribbons appear that are specifically related to that object. And that is what we call contextual ribbons. Now, the final thing I want to show you in this lesson is just how you can customize the status bar. Now, the status bar is the bar that runs all the way across the bottom of the interface. So you can see if we work from the left, mine currently says page 1 of 1. It says English United States, which is the language that I'm typing in. And it also contains on the right-hand side my zoom slider, as well as a couple of other things. Now, you can control what appears on this status bar by customizing it. And again, this involves a right-click menu. So if we hover our mouse over the status bar and right-click, we get our customized status bar menu. And everything that I have ticked is going to display on my status bar. Now, you can see that I have quite a few different things ticked there, but I don't have a great deal of information on my status bar currently. And that's because I'm not currently clicked on or using something that requires that information to appear. But it is showing me the page number, it's also showing me the language, and it's showing me things like my zoom slider. And you'll notice if I deselect this, then the zoom slider disappears from the bottom right hand corner. Click it again and it appears. So again, this is something that is definitely worth customizing because this information that appears in the status bar can be really useful when you're working with different objects in Visio. So in general, I tend to have pretty much everything turned on in here. That is it for this lesson. I will see you in the next one. It's important to know where you can go to obtain help when you're working in Visio. Unfortunately for us, Visio has a very comprehensive help system. So let's take a look at all the different utilities that we have available. Now, the first and most obvious thing is we can obtain help through something called screen tips. Now, screen tips are particularly helpful if you want to know what a particular command on the ribbon does. So, for example, if I hover my mouse over, let's say, the copy command, you'll see that I get what we call a screen tip pop-up. And this is going to tell you the title of the command. It's going to show you the keyboard shortcut in brackets if it has one. And then it's going to give you a short description of what that command actually does. So for copy, it says it puts a copy of the selection on the clipboard so you can paste it somewhere else. If I hover over something like the connector, again, you can see that this has a keyboard shortcut of Ctrl+3, and it says it allows you to draw connectors between different objects. So these screen tips are super useful if I just want to get a high level understanding of what that command's going to do when I click on it. Now, as with everything in Visio, if you don't particularly like these screen tips or you want to customize them, then you can do that as well through Visio Options. So let's take a quick look at that. I'm going to jump across to File to go into that backstage area, and we're going to go to Options. We want to be on the General page, and in this first group right at the bottom, you see you have Screen Tips Style. And I get a few different ways that I can customize these screen tips. So if I don't particularly like them and I want to turn them off, I could select Don't Show Screen Tips. I can choose to not show the description in my screen tips. So maybe I just want the keyboard shortcut and the actual name of the command without the description. I could choose this option. Or if I want the whole lot, absolutely everything, which is in general what I have it set to because I find it the most useful, I can select this first option, Show Featured Descriptions in Screen Tips. So that is where you can go if you want to customize them slightly. Now, aside from screen tips, you also have the Tell Me feature. And the Tell Me feature isn't particularly obvious, but it's actually where we have the word search at the top here. And you'll see as I hover over it, I get a screen tip that says Tell Me. It's got a keyboard shortcut of Alt+Q. And it says just start typing here to bring features to your fingertips and get help. So if I don't know how to do something, I can just simply start to type it in here. It's going to show me where that's located on the ribbons, and it's also going to give me the option of accessing more help on this particular command. So maybe I want to know how to insert a text box. I can simply type that in, and then underneath the Actions heading, it's showing me text box with a pop-out menu. If I click the pop-out menu, it's going to take me directly to that particular command. So if I click Draw Horizontal Text Box, my mouse then changes to that tiny crosshair, and I can then draw another text box. So this saves me from having to find where that's located on the ribbon. So super useful. Let's just type that in again. So insert a text box. Because the other options that I have aside from actions is I can choose to get some help on inserting text boxes. And you can see here it says that there are 10 results. So if I just want to read up a little bit about text boxes, how you insert them, I can click on this link. It's going to open up the help pane on the right hand side, and it's going to link me through to online help, and all of these different titles are related to text boxes. So it really depends what I'm trying to do, what I'm interested in reading about. So for example, if I was to select this first option just here, it's going to jump me to the Microsoft help page essentially, and it's going to walk me through the process of inserting a text field into a shape. If I want to go back to my search results, if I click the back arrow, it's going to take me back to my results, and I can choose to click on a separate link. You'll also notice in here that you will occasionally have videos as well. So if I click on this, it's going to show me a video which will step me through the process of how to add text to shapes, diagrams, or connectors. When I'm done with this help pane, if I just click the cross in the top right hand corner, that's going to close it down. And if at any point I want to bring that up again, I don't necessarily have to go up to the Tell Me box. I can just press the F1 key on my keyboard to open up help, and I can run a search from here. Now, the final way that you can access help files is by using the help ribbon. And you'll see that I have my help ribbon turned on up here, but if you don't see the help ribbon, then this might be a ribbon that you need to turn on through your Visio options. So let's just take a moment to take a look at how we do that. Again, we're going to File, down to Options. Now for this, when we want to turn ribbons off or on to show or hide them, we need to select the Customize Ribbon page. And on the right hand side, you're going to see all of the ribbons, and you'll see that currently the majority of these have a tick next to them, which means that they're going to display. So you might find that if you can't see the help ribbon, you'll probably find that you just don't have a tick in this particular box. So make sure this is ticked, click on OK, and then you should see this help ribbon at the top. Now we just have 4 different icons on here. The first one is help. And this will jump you into the same screen that we were just in. So it's going to open up that pane on the right hand side. It's pretty much exactly the same as pressing the F1 shortcut key. The next option you have is to contact support. So let's test this out. How do I insert a text box. Let's click on Get Help. And of course, the first thing it provides us with are some self-help solutions, so links to the help pages. Now you'll notice at the bottom here, underneath Get More Help, it says, how can I talk to an agent? Now currently it says that there are no support options available. Now this might be different depending on your location. If you're in the US, you might be able to call somebody at Microsoft to get help with your query, but for me, I don't have any other support options other than the help files, or I can jump into the community forums. And I will say that community forums are a fantastic resource because there's always somebody who knows the answer to your question. So it's always worth signing up to community forums just in case you have something that you can't find within the help files. So that is your second option. We then have a feedback button, so if you want to send feedback to Microsoft, either about something that you like or you don't like, or even if you have a suggestion for future releases, then you can definitely do that as well. And then finally, you can access the training files. And this is a gallery of different videos related to Visio training. So if you want to learn how to create diagrams, I could select this and then I get a whole bunch of videos which walks me through the process. So again, a super helpful little feature if you're struggling to know how to do something. So hopefully you agree with me, the help is pretty comprehensive within Visio. And of course, if all else fails, we can always jump onto the internet, ask our question, and we're probably going to find a link to our answer. So those are the options that you have with regards to accessing help from within the Visio application. That's it for this lesson. I will see you in the next one. Hello everyone and welcome back to the course. It's time for us now to take a look at ways that we can improve our efficiency by utilizing keyboard shortcuts. And again, keyboard shortcuts might be something that you're familiar with because you've used them in other applications. And I will say that with Microsoft applications, keyboard shortcuts tend to be the same across all of the different apps. So keyboard shortcuts that you use in Excel or Word, many of them apply to Visio as well. And if you're not really sure what I mean by that terminology, it's really just a way of executing an action or executing a command using the keyboard as opposed to clicking with your mouse on the command on the ribbon. And a lot of people find keyboard shortcuts a lot more efficient and a lot quicker to work with. Now, I will say there are hundreds of keyboard shortcuts available in Visio, and you are never going to remember all of them. So I generally tend to advise people to find 5 to 10 that are particularly useful. So how do we go about finding out which keyboard shortcuts are assigned to which commands? Well, there's a couple of ways that we can do this. The first way we've already actually seen. If you remember in the last lesson when we were hovering over these commands, so if I hover over copy again, you'll see in the screen tip, if there is a keyboard shortcut assigned to that particular command, it's going to show in brackets. So I can see that the copy keyboard shortcut is Control+C. Now, when you're executing keyboard shortcuts, you don't have to hold down Control and C at the same time. You press Control and then you press C. So if I hover my mouse over bold, you can see there that the keyboard shortcut is Control+B. Now, some keyboard shortcuts require a few more key presses. For example, if I hover over the increase font size, you can see the keyboard shortcut there is Shift Control period. And again, you don't hold all of these down at the same time. You hold down Control, keep Control down when you press Shift, and keep both of them down when you press period. Now, one thing you will notice is that not every single command has a keyboard shortcut assigned to it. So for example, if I hover over the font color, you can see that I don't have a keyboard shortcut in brackets for this. So again, just be aware of that. Don't expect everything to have a shortcut key assigned to it. I will say that most things do have a shortcut key. So connectors here, Control+3. Pointer tool, Control+1, so on and so forth. So that's a real quick way of being able to see if a command has a keyboard shortcut. Now, if you want to see or print out a full list of all the keyboard shortcuts available in Visio, so you can go through and maybe pick 5 to 10 that are going to be useful to you, you can use the Tell Me feature or the search box to find keyboard shortcuts in the help file, and it's going to list them all out there for you. Now, as we're talking about keyboard shortcuts, I'm going to access the Tell Me box using a shortcut key. And the shortcut key is Alt-Q. And you can see that that activates that Tell Me box. So now I'm going to type in keyboard shortcuts. And right at the bottom, it says get help on keyboard shortcuts. There are 10 results. So let's select this. It's going to open up that help pane on the right hand side. And the first link I have here are keyboard shortcuts for Visio. Now, when I click on this link, it gives me a little bit of information about what keyboard shortcuts are. And then I have a whole bunch of different links. So the keyboard shortcuts are divided down into different categories depending on what you're trying to do. So if I click on this frequently used shortcuts link, it's going to show me all of the different shortcut keys to perform various different tasks. Now, if you find this help screen a bit small, you can pop this out. So if I hover over just above where it says keyboard shortcuts, you can see my cursor changes. I can click to pick this window up and drag it out, and then I can make this a little bit bigger if I want to make it a bit easier to read. So I can see here that if I want to go to full screen view, I can press the F5 key. If I want to open the Home tab in the ribbon, I can press Alt-H. If I want to pull up the Format Shape task pane, F3, so on and so forth. So this is definitely worth having a look through and maybe memorizing a few that you think are going to be useful to you. Now, another way of using shortcuts within Visio is to press the Alt key on your keyboard. Now, you'll notice that as soon as I do that, we get various different letters and numbers assigned to the different tabs and also to the quick access toolbar commands. And I can basically use these letters and numbers to navigate using my keyboard. So I'm essentially using keyboard shortcuts instead of my mouse to move through the different ribbons and commands. And I will say this is particularly useful from an efficiency perspective for people who like to keep their hands on the keyboard when they're working, and also for people who maybe have some issues when it comes to working with a mouse, like a wrist injury or something like that. So for example, if I want to jump across to the View tab, I can see that the letter W is assigned to that tab. If I press W on my keyboard, I'm now on the View tab, and it's now assigned a letter to each of the commands. So if I want to access Zoom, for example, I can press Q. It's then going to pull up the different options I have when it comes to magnification. Now I'm going to cancel out of this little window, and again, I don't have to use my mouse to do this. I can press my tab key. You can see it moves across to OK, press it again, it moves across to cancel, and then I can hit the Enter key. So I've basically done all of that without having to pick up my mouse. So maybe I now want to insert something, so I can press N to jump me to that Insert tab. Perhaps I want to insert an online picture, so I'm going to press F, and it's going to jump me to the online pictures gallery. I can perform my search, let's just say an apple. I can use my arrow keys to move through my different options, and when I find one I like, I can hit enter. Once it's selected, I can see that insert is highlighted at the bottom, so I can press enter again to insert that picture of an apple. So I managed to do that entire process without actually having to reach for my mouse at all. Now I'm going to undo this because I don't want a giant apple in the middle of my Visio diagram. Now, another really important keyboard shortcut is the undo keyboard shortcut. Now, remember, we do have the undo command on our quick access toolbar. It's the second one just here, but the keyboard shortcut for undo is Control Z. So this will Control Z the last action that you did. It will undo the last action. So for me, that was inserting that picture, and you can see that it's now gone. So lots of different ways that you can work with keyboard shortcuts. That's all from me for now. I will see you in the next lesson. So far in this course, we've been dipping in and out of those Visio options. And I really just want to close out this particular section just by highlighting to you a few other options that you might want to review or change. So let's jump back up to that File tab to take us into the Backstage area, go down to Options and click on the General page. Now, as we saw previously, we can control if we want that mini toolbar to show when we select text. And this is personal preference. If you don't like it, make sure that you don't have a tick in this box. Underneath that, we have Live Preview enabled. And you'll remember Live Preview when we were changing the fill color of our shapes. Live Preview enables you to see what the shape is going to look like if you were to select a particular color from the palette. Now, I find this really useful, but again, if you don't like that option or you don't have any use for it, then you can definitely turn it off. And of course, we also saw how we can customize our screen tips. And then underneath there, we have a section called Personalize Your Copy of Microsoft Office. And you can see it's got my username and also my initials. Now, these are editable fields, so you could technically change these to whatever you wanted to. So you could change this to something crazy like Minnie Mouse if you so desired. Just be aware that certain actions within Visio will use this information. For example, if you were to add comments into your Visio diagram, which we're going to get onto a bit later in this course, it's going to tag those comments with your name and it's going to pick up your username from this area of options. So unless you want your comments saying Minnie Mouse, it's probably best to keep this on your name. And I can also change my office background, which I currently have set to clouds. And if you're wondering what that is, if you take a look right at the top where we have this blue area, I have a very slight pattern in the background here. That is the clouds pattern. That is what this little section controls. So if I change this to doodle circles, you'll see in a moment when I click on OK, that background pattern is going to change. I can also change my office theme from colourful to something like dark grey. And of course, finally at the bottom, we can choose if we want that start screen to show when the application starts. And if you recall, we actually deselected that. So let's just click on OK for a moment and see these changes take effect. So click on OK. You'll see I now have doodle circles at the top here and my entire interface has changed to a dark grey colour. So once again, this is entirely personal preference. Now, I don't particularly like those doodle circles. Let's change it back to clouds, and I'm going to change mine back to colourful. So let's move to the next page, which is the proofing page. And this is where you can control things like your autocorrect options and also how Visio deals with spelling and grammar errors. So you can jump in here and you can basically set up your spell checker. You can decide what you want it to ignore and what you want it to include. But one option I would recommend that you turn on is this one at the bottom, check spelling as you type. So when you start typing text directly into your diagram, Visio is going to highlight immediately if you've made a spelling or grammar error. Now, I like to have this option turned on because I like to deal with spelling errors as soon as they occur. So let me show you what I mean. I'm going to click on OK. And I have some text here, but let's just delete that out. And I'm going to make an intentional spelling error. So let's say text box. And you can see immediately I have a red squiggly line under the word text. So Visio has picked up that this isn't spelt correctly. I can right click and it's going to give me some suggestions. I can also choose to ignore the spelling error, or if it's an unusual word, I might want to add it to my dictionary. So things like people's names, organisation names, which are valid words, they're not spelt incorrectly, they just might not be recognised by the Visio dictionary. So for things like that, I would always add those into my dictionary. However, in this case, I can see that I did mean to spell the word text. I can select it from the menu to correct it immediately. So check spelling as you type is a good option to have turned on. Let's jump across to the save page. Now, there's only really a couple of things I want to point out to you in here, and that is underneath this Save Documents heading, I want to ensure that my files are being saved in the Visio document format, which is the VSDX file extension. And that is pretty much what you'll save all of your Visio diagrams as, unless they contain macros. And if you're not sure what a macro is, I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But a macro is basically a way of automating tasks and processes in Visio. And if you do have a macro within your document, you need to save it as a Visio macro enabled document. The other option you have in here is to save this as an older version of Visio. So maybe if you intend to send this to somebody who has a much older version of Visio than you do, so 2003 to 2010, you could choose to save it in an older version to ensure that they're not going to have any issues when they open it and try to work in the document. But in general, you want to have this set to Visio document. The other option that's important in here is this second option down, because this controls how often Visio saves your document. So if something goes wrong with your Visio document, say it gets stuck and you have to close Visio down, it's going to auto recover information every 10 minutes. So you want to make sure that you have this set to a reasonably low number so that if the worst does happen, you're not losing a lot of work. Let's jump across to our language settings. So this is where you can set up your display language and also your authoring and proofing languages. So you can see here that I have mine set to English, that is my display language. And then underneath, I have two languages that I use when I'm creating and editing documents, including things like spell checking and grammar checking. And you'll see here that even though I'm in the UK, I have United States English set as my preferred authoring language. Now, the reason why I have that set is because most of the work that I do is for US clients, so I want to make sure that I'm spelling things in the correct way, because even though we both speak English, we do have slight differences when it comes to how we spell certain words. And a good example of that would be a word like colour. In the UK, we throw in an extra U into that word. So I want to make sure that when I'm spell checking in English United States. Now, if you want to add more languages, you definitely can do that. So I can just select add a language. I can choose another language from the list. So let's go for French. Click on add. It's going to add that in. And if I wanted to, I could set this as my preferred language. Now, unfortunately, I can't speak French, so I'm not going to set that as my preferred language. I'm actually just going to remove that from my list. But what I would do in here is if I was working for a UK-based client, I would probably come into here and set English United Kingdom as my preferred language. So double check to make sure you have all of the correct settings in here. Now, if we click on the ease of access page, this is a really quick way of making Visio more accessible. And you'll see it's kind of cherry-picked a few items from these other pages that you might want to quickly change. So for example, we can change our screen tip style, which we've seen how to do previously. I can choose if I want the shortcut keys shown in the screen tips, which I do. And I can also come here to enable the start screen when this application starts. So pretty much the important things from this page we've already seen how to access. Let's jump across to the advanced page. And in advanced, you normally find a whole heap of different options. So I'm definitely not going to go through all of them. I will say that most of the time, the default settings are pretty much fine for most people. However, one thing I will highlight, if we scroll down, is the maximum number of undos. So we saw previously how we can press the Ctrl-Z keyboard shortcut to undo our last action. Now I could press that 20 times to undo the last 20 actions. And of course, I can modify this. So if I want to take this up to 30, I can definitely do that, or I can reduce it down to 10, 15. So if you are somebody who makes a lot of mistakes and likes to backtrack, then I would definitely review this and maybe set that to 30 or 40. As we scroll down a bit more, we've already seen this is where we can come to change the number of recent documents that we see in that backstage area, and we can also change our default units down here as well. And again, I would say this is probably something you're going to want to modify after you've been working with the defaults for a while. If you're not getting on with them, then you can decide to change these default units to something completely different. But for the time being, I'm going to keep these as the default. Let's jump across to the Customize ribbon page. This is where we can come if we want to add additional commands onto our ribbons. So you can see the ribbons listed on the right-hand side. I can expand them out and I can see the different groups, and then I can see the commands that are within these groups. And if I want to add additional commands, I can definitely do that. I can select and click add to any of my ribbons. Now I will say that if you're using Visio at an organization, then sometimes this option is disabled. A lot of organizations lock down their ribbons and they don't let you customize them because they want to be very strict with what you see on your ribbon. So if you come into here and you find that the add button is grayed out, then you probably have some kind of company policy that stops you from customizing your ribbons. What you can also do in here is create your own ribbons with your own commands on them. And I'm going to show you how to do this towards the end of this course. The next page down is the quick access toolbar. We've already been in here. We've seen how this works. So let's jump straight to the next page, which is the add-ins page. So add-ins in general allow you to expand on the current capabilities of Visio. So this area will display any Microsoft add-ins and it will let you view and manage them from here. Now you can see that I don't have any listed, so there's nothing too much to see in this section at the moment. And then finally, we have our Trust Center settings. And again, this is something I'm going to go into in more detail towards the end of the course. But just to give you a high-level overview as to what this actually is, it basically allows you to determine how certain file types are open. So it's a way of keeping your documents, your diagrams, and your computer safe, secure, and healthy. Trust Center allows you to determine how things like files that contain macros are handled. It also allows you to set things like trusted locations. So if you were to open a Visio diagram from an external system, if it's not listed as a trusted location, then you're going to get some notifications, some warning messages. So the whole idea of this is to help keep your computer safe and virus-free. Now, as I said, I'm not going to go into this in too much detail at the moment, but just be aware that that's what it does. So those are your Visio options. I've given you a very high level overview there and just tried to cherry pick some of the more important ones. As I said, the majority of these settings, the defaults, are going to be fine for you. But we will at various different points in this course be dipping in and out of those options when they're relevant to what we're doing. But for the time being, that is it. We're done with this lesson and we are done with this first introductory section. In the next section, we're really going to start to get going and we're going to create our first drawing. So I'm going to grab a coffee and then I will see you over there. Hello everyone and welcome back to this course on Visio 2019. In this lesson, we're going to create our first drawing. And what we're going to create is an office layout. Now, this is a reasonably straightforward drawing, but it's going to allow you to see all of the basics and also get an introduction to Visio terminology. And some words and phrases that I use, I'll explain as we go through. Now, the first thing we're going to do is select a template. So let's jump up to the File tab, which is going to take us into that backstage area. And we're creating a new drawing. And this is going to open up all of those Visio templates. So I'm just going to scroll down just to take a look at my templates, and we're looking for the office layout. And you can see that there it is, the last one in the second row. So let's click to open up this template. We get this dialog box, which tells us the name of the template, who it's provided by, in this case, Microsoft. We have a small description of the template, the download size, and then the units that we want to load this template in. Now, all of the settings on my PC are in US units, so I'm going to stick with US, but if you would prefer to use metric units, then you can select the other option. The only thing I will say is that I'm going to be using US units throughout this course, so it might be a bit easier for you to follow along if you use the same units that I'm using. Let's click on Create. So the template has now downloaded and opened in the Visio window. And you can see that initially it is blank, it has no shapes in it. Now before we start to build our office layout and add some shapes in, let's save our template. So back up to File to take us into that backstage area and straight down to Save As. Now remember, if you've saved into the folder recently, then you're going to see it here on the right hand side. And if you recall, I pinned the course files folder to the top of the list, so I just need to click once to select, and then I can save my drawing. And I'm going to call this Office Layout 01 and click Save. So now we're all saved and ready to go. Now the first thing I want to highlight to you in this interface window is that your drawing can have many pages. And if you take a look right at the bottom, you can see here it's telling me that I'm currently on page 1. And if I click the up arrow, it's going to show me all of the pages contained within this drawing. Now, currently I only have 1, but you could add many different pages for many different drawings. So maybe throughout the process of designing an office layout, you have 1 page which shows the layout of the reception area. Maybe you want to add another page which shows the layout of the main office floor. Maybe another page that shows the layout of the kitchen or the meeting rooms, so on and so forth. And sometimes it's quite nice to be able to keep all of those layouts together under one drawing, as opposed to creating separate drawings for each. And if you want to add a page, it's a simple case of clicking the plus symbol, and you can see now it's added page 2. I can go through and add as many pages as I like. And if I click the up arrow, I can toggle between those different pages very easily. Now, I only need 1 page at the moment, so I'm going to delete the 2 pages that I've just added. And deleting pages is a simple case of right-clicking on the page and just selecting Delete from the Contextual menu. So let's now move our attention to this panel that we have on the left-hand side, the Shapes window. Now, when you select a template, you're going to get content in this Shapes window. And this is going to be content that's related to whichever template you've selected. So because I've selected the office layout template, I'm now getting categories like walls, doors and windows, office furniture, office equipment, so on and so forth, with all of the different shapes that appear underneath those categories. Now this shapes window can be collapsed, so again, just right at the top, I can minimize the shapes window, which is going to give me a little bit more room for my layout. Now, when you collapse up your shapes window, it doesn't disappear entirely. Instead, it minimizes the shape so you just see the icons. And if you hover over the icon, you're going to get a little screen tip pop up to tell you what shape that is. Now, these different categories that we have here, so where it says office equipment, office furniture, walls, doors and windows, these are what we call stencils. And that is very important Visio terminology. And each stencil contains a number of masters. So underneath the walls, doors and windows stencil, I have the room master, I have the window master, the tea room master, so on and so forth. And I can use each of these masters to build my drawing. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab this room master and I'm going to drag and drop it onto my drawing. So let's click, drag, I'm going to place it in the middle and drop. Now, once you place a master onto a drawing, the terminology changes slightly. It's now called a shape. And dragging and dropping is the basic way to add shapes to your drawings. Now, because I've used the room master, this is the overall size of the room that I'm trying to plan. And you can see that I have the dimensions currently on either side. And of course, because I have this set to US dimensions, that's what I'm seeing just here. I'm going to come back to dimensions a little bit later on. So now that we have our basic room layout, let's add something else. I'm going to grab the window master from the stencil and I'm going to drag this onto my drawing, and look what happens. If I pull this near a wall, you can see that Visio recognizes that in general, windows tend to go on walls. It's given me that little green square which says glue to geometry. And this is one of those key skills in Visio, gluing one thing to another. So if I now let go, Visio does its best guess to position that window on the wall. Everything's all nicely lined up. I haven't had to do too much fiddling around to get that to look neat. And of course, you can move these things around and adjust the size of the overall room, and we're going to take a look at that a little bit later. But for the time being, let's add something else. I'm going to drag the door master from the stencil, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to drag that over here. And I'm going to say, I want this door just about there, glue to geometry. And once again, it's done a best guess and positioned this shape. Now, if you decide you want to delete any of these shapes, it's a simple case of clicking on the shape and then just pressing the delete key on your keyboard. Now, I actually do want that door, so let's redrag that back and glue to geometry. So far, both of these shapes that we've added to our drawing have come from the walls, doors and windows stencil. So let's select something different. I'm going to select the office furniture stencil. And this loads up a whole bunch of different masters that I can drag onto my drawing. So for example, let's grab one of these. I'm going to go for the boat-shaped table. I'm going to drag and I'm going to drop that onto my drawing. Now, as you can see, this table is rather large, so I'm going to resize that. Now, there are a few different ways that you can resize shapes, and I'm going to show you how you can be super precise a little bit later on. But for the time being, if you just want to do a simple resize, you can see whilst I have this shape selected, around the outside I have these circles or these resize handles. And all I need to do is just drag it in to make that a little bit smaller, and I can then reposition that table in the room. And in fact, I might want to make that a little bit smaller again. And click away to deselect. You can also rotate any of these shapes. So you'll see just above, I have this little rotation handle. And if I click and drag, it's going to allow me to rotate that table around. And I can rotate it the full 360 degrees to get it positioned exactly as I like it. Now, one thing you also might have noticed as I was resizing and moving this shape is that some guidelines pop up on the screen to help me position this object. So these are super useful when it comes to positioning objects on your drawing. And you can see where I currently have my object, both of those green lines intersect, which means it's dead in the center of this drawing. And we're going to speak a lot more about aligning and all the different alignment tools that you have, because it's such an important thing for you to grasp when you're working in Visio. Now, what if at this stage I decide that I don't want a boat-shaped table anymore, I want a different type of table? Well, I could, of course, go back across to my stencil and drag a different table in and delete out this one. But a quicker way of doing this would be to select the boat-shaped table, jump up to the Home tab, and in the editing group on the end, we have a Change Shape option. And this is basically going to show me all the other different styles of table from the office furniture stencil. So maybe I decide that instead of this table, I want this one here, which is, I think, the racetrack table. So let's click. The shape has now changed. I haven't had to go in and delete it and then drag something else. It's a little bit quicker just to change the shape. So the main points to take away here is that templates contain stencils, and those stencils are related to whichever template you've selected. Each stencil contains masters which you can drag and drop onto the drawing. Once you drop them onto the drawing, they become shapes, and you can move those shapes around, align them, and position them wherever you want to on the drawing. I think that's more than enough for now. That's the end of this lesson. I will see you in the next one.
For the next section, you'll want to download the course exercise files. Click the link below in the video description to get these. You can also scroll through the details to find timestamps for each section in this course. If you're enjoying this training, please leave us a comment.
Hello everyone, and welcome to exercise 1 of this course. Now, as with any of the exercises in this course, you'll find my solution in the exercises folder. Now, what exercise 1 shows us is an L-shaped office with a couple of windows. And in that office, we have some furniture. So we've got a couple of chairs, a few desks, and also things like pot plants, lamps, waste bins, so on and so forth. So what I basically want you to do is recreate this office layout. Now, I don't want you to worry too much about getting it exactly the same size or the same layout. I just really want you to get used to adding shapes, moving them around, rotating them, resizing them, and of course, deleting them. The other thing you may want to experiment with when doing this is opening the doors to the left or to the right. And just as a little bit of a hint, the contextual menus are really going to help you when it comes to dealing with doors. So give this a go. As I said, if you want to check, my answer is in the exercise files folder. That's it for now. I will see you in the next lesson. Now, as we saw previously when we created our office layout and we selected a template, when you do choose a template, you basically get an empty diagram. You just get the correct stencils loaded into the Shapes window. But basically, you are starting from scratch. However, In 2019, a new range of starter diagrams have been introduced, and these really just give you a much fuller base from which to start from. So let's take a look at some of the starter diagrams that we have to choose from. So back up to File and down into New to pull up our templates. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to scroll down to my templates. I'm going to select this one, the basic flowchart. And what it presents me with is a selection of different basic flowcharts. So I've got 4 different templates that I could select here. The first one is just a basic blank flowchart. I then have a vertical flowchart, a decision branches flowchart, and then finally an on-page reference flowchart. And you can see as I click on each one of these, the description changes at the side so you can get a better idea as to how this template works. Now each of these is called a starter diagram. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to select this one here, the Decision Branches Flowchart, and click on Create. And instead of getting just a blank template with my shapes window and different stencils, what I get is a start diagram with shapes already on it. And I also get a little tips pane offering me a little bit of help with this drawing. So you can see here in this first tip, if I scroll in very slightly to make that a bit easier for you to see, it talks first about the theme. So it says color can add clarity and elegance. Pick a theme from the Design tab. So it's giving you a bit of a tip as to how to change the overall color scheme of your drawing. It then says drag and drop to put a shape between 2 connected shapes. Drag it onto the connector between them. And if you want to move a sub-process to a different path, on the Process tab, use Create from Selection. So this little tips pane can be super useful, particularly if you are reasonably new to Visio 2019 and you need a little bit of guidance. So fundamentally already, this template is different to the one that we created previously because we already have shapes on it. We don't need to start from scratch, and we're also getting a little bit of help. Now, it is worth noting that not all of the templates have starter diagrams. But just to show you another example of a template that we're going to be using in this course, let's jump back up to File and go down to New. And this time I'm going to select Basic Network Diagram. Let's choose this last template and click on Create. And again, you can see that this one already contains different shapes, and we also have those useful tips at the bottom. Now, another thing that's worth noting is that not all of these starter diagrams are available in all editions of Visio. So some are very specific to Visio Professional. So let's jump back to File again and go down to New. And if I scroll down, I'm going to select this one here, BPMN diagram. And you can see that for this one, I have a few different starter diagrams available. Now, this is one of those diagrams that isn't available in Visio Standard. It's only available in Visio Professional. So just be aware of that if you are using Visio Standard. Now, the final thing I want to mention here is that once you're done with these tips, you can just delete them out. So these are probably not something you're going to want to keep on your final drawing. And if I click on these tips, I get the selection border around the outside, and I can simply press the delete key to delete those tips out. That's it for this lesson. I will see you in the next one. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the course. In this lesson, we're going to look at the Visio Workspace in a little bit more detail. And we're going to start by taking a look at the Shapes window and the features associated with it. Now, hopefully you were successful with exercise 1 because that's what I have loaded up into my window right now. Now, one thing you might have noticed when you were working through exercise 1 is you might have had some trouble lining things up and also positioning shapes. And this is one of those topics that's best to cover reasonably early on in the course because it's something that's so fundamental to working in Visio. And that's why we're going to start by looking at some of the important features of the workspace. Now, as you use Visio more and more, if you are going to use it to draw large, complex diagrams, then you're going to need as much space as possible on the page. And as we've already seen, one way of doing that is to minimize the Shapes window. Now, you might think that when you do that, you are reasonably limited with how much you can use that Shapes window. But remember, by minimizing, you're not completely getting rid of the Shapes window. You still have access to all of the masters within your stencil. And if you need to scroll through these, you'll see right at the bottom you have a down arrow, and as soon as you hover over it, it scrolls through the rest of the masters from within that stencil. And the same thing applies to the arrow at the top. Now, just above there, if you wanted to access other stencils, you can see that you have this little icon just here with an arrow pointing to the right. And if I click on that, it's going to allow me to access different stencils and load up those masters. So currently you can see that I'm clicked on the Office Accessories stencil. So the point I'm trying to make here is that you don't have to maximize the Shapes window in order to access all of your commands. Now, I mentioned earlier that a template will include one or more stencils. So you might think that when you open a specific template, so in this case the office layout, you're only going to see the stencils related to the office layout template. But that's not technically how it works. When you select a template, it does load up the stencils that are related to that template, but in fact, all of the standard stencils are available in every template, they just aren't always visible. So technically, if I wanted to draw an office layout, I could select any template in Visio and still manage to draw the office layout. I would just need to enable the stencils that I need. Now with this particular template, which is the office layout template, you can see in this menu I have enabled all of the stencils that are related to this template. But if I wanted to load up some completely different stencils, all I would need to do is go to More Shapes, and let's go down to Maps and Floor Plans. Maybe I want to go across to Building Plan, and this is going to show me all of the stencils related to the building plan. Now you can see for this particular plan, 4 of them have a tick next to them. So it means that those 4 stencils are enabled for this particular layout. But if I wanted to load up a completely different stencil, all I would need to do is scroll through the list, and let's just say I want to load up plumbing. I just need to select to enable that stencil. And that then makes that stencil available. And when I click, you can now see it's been added to the bottom. So you can pretty much customize in any template which stencils you see, which in turn gives you access to all of the masters on that stencil. Now, if I decide that I've now finished using this plumbing stencil and I no longer need it, you can also close individual stencils when you're done using them. Now for this, you do need to maximize the Shapes window by clicking on the arrow. I'm going to scroll down and find my plumbing stencil, right click, and you can see I've got a close button just there. And that's just going to close that stencil down and remove it from the list. Now, some features in Visio can be particularly useful for saving time, and one of those is the use of quick shapes. And each stencil has its own set of quick shapes. So if we take a look at the walls, doors, and windows stencil, if we look at the masters underneath, you can see a very faint grey line. Now, everything above this line is considered to be a quick shape, so more often than not, they're the shapes that you use most often. And then we have all of our masters underneath, and your quick shapes are always going to be at the top of your list. So let's go across to a different stencil. I'm going to open up Office Accessories. Again, you can see that grey line that separates my quick shapes, which is these 4, from the rest of my shapes. And it's very simple to add any shape, any master to your quick shapes list. So if we scroll down, maybe I decide that I want to add the round waste can. So all I need to do is right click, and we have an option in the contextual menu that says Add to Quick Shapes. And it's as simple as that. You can now see that that has moved above the grey line, making it super easy for me to access. And if you want to reorder these quick shapes, then you can do that as well. You simply click and you can drag, and you can see I get a little line which is telling me where it's going to be positioned when I let go of my mouse. So you can really organize these in the most appropriate order for you. So you can adjust any of the quick shapes for any of the stencils in this way. Now what you can also do is create your own stencils. Now what you'll notice is if you click on the More Shapes arrow, you have a My Shapes menu item at the top. And within My Shapes, we have favorites. So let's suppose that I have 3 or 4 shapes and I want them to be easily accessible. And let's suppose I want to pick shapes from all different stencils. So I'm going to go across to the Office Furniture stencil, and maybe I want to add the desk chair to my favorites. All I need to do is right click, add to my shapes, add to Favorites. I'm going to go across to an entirely different stencil. Let's jump to Office Equipment, and I'm going to add Notebook PC, right-click, add to my shapes, add to Favorites. And let's add one more. I'm going to add the printer. Let's right-click, add to my shapes, and put that into Favorites as well. So what I've essentially done there, if I click on More Shapes, go to My Shapes and take a look at my Favorites, it now loads up my favorite stencil and it's showing the masters that I've added, so I can keep all of the shapes that I've customized in one place. And as you can probably see just above, it says drop quick shapes here, so maybe I want to add the desk chair to my quick shapes. I can also drag and drop to this area to move that above the grey line. Now, the final thing I'm going to talk about in this lesson is just the different ways that you can view your drawing. So we've already seen how we can obtain more space to work on our drawing by minimizing that shapes window. But the shapes window is still there. If you wanted to get rid of it altogether, if you jump up to the View tab, and in the Show group you have a Task Panes drop down, this is where you can control what you're seeing in your window. So currently Shapes is selected, but if I was to deselect that, it's going to remove that Shapes window entirely. Now I tend to like to have that turned on, so let's just open that up again. Another thing that I like to have turned on sometimes is this Shape Data option. And if we hover over, it says it's going to show the Shape Data window to see the data properties for the selected shape. So let's turn this on. And this is going to give you information related to the selection in your drawing. Now this window can be resized, so I'm actually going to drag the corner of it out a little bit. Now I'm not really seeing anything because I haven't selected anything in my drawing. But if I was to select this desk just here, you'll see that it starts to populate. Now I don't have a great deal of information in here at the moment, but it is telling me the exact dimensions, the width and the length of the object that I'm currently clicked on. If I click on something different, that's going to change and update. Click on something different again to get those exact dimensions. Now I'm going to be covering shape data in a lot more detail later on, but it's just to get an introduction before we move on to using it a lot more later in the course. And of course, if you want to close this down, you have a cross button in the top corner, and that's just going to get rid of that shape data pop out. That's it for this lesson. I will see you in the next one. As you might have already seen in the course so far, sometimes positioning objects in Visio can be tricky. And it might be that you want to do the positioning accurately, but also quickly. Now, this is where the dynamic grid can help. Now, the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to create a new drawing. So I'm going to press the shortcut key Control-N. And this basically loads up a completely blank template. I don't have any shapes on my drawing, and I don't have any stencils loaded on the left-hand side yet. Now, the easiest way for me to demo this to you is really just to load up some simple shapes on the drawing so I can show you the dynamic grid. So let's jump into More Shapes, and we're going to load up a stencil. So if we go down to General, I'm just going to load up some basic shapes. And there we go. So I now have this stencil, and you can see that this particular stencil just contains regular shapes. We have things like rectangles, squares, circles, things like that. Now, before we go any further, I'm going to save this to the Course Files folder. And I think you've seen how we do that more than enough times, so I'm going to do that off camera and rejoin you in a couple of seconds. So now everything is saved, let's turn on the dynamic grid. Now to do this, we jump up to the View tab, and in the Visual Aids group, we want to make sure that we have dynamic grid selected. So if you don't have a tick in that box, then pop one in there now. And if we take a look at the screen tip, it says Dynamic Grid Guides assist in the sizing, spacing, and alignment of shapes in relation to one another. So this is super useful when you're trying to position objects on a page. Now I'm going to zoom in a little bit using my zoom slider to make this a bit easier for you to see. So the first thing I'm going to do is let's grab a basic shape. I'm going to use a circle. I'm going to drag and drop it onto my drawing. And I'm going to reposition this somewhere into the middle just here. I'm then going to grab a square and also drag and drop that onto the drawing. Now watch what happens when I drag this square towards the circle. You'll see that I get these alignment guides. So this is telling me that the leftmost side of the square is lined up with the leftmost side of the circle, the middle is also aligned, and the right-hand side is also aligned. So this makes it really easy for me to align two objects with a good degree of accuracy. Now this particular example works so well because the shapes are essentially the same size. So let me drag the square back over here. I'm going to make this circle a bit bigger by dragging out the resize handle. So now the circle is a lot bigger than the square. So now if I drag the square underneath the circle, you'll see it shows me when it's aligned to the left-hand side. If I drag it across, it's telling me it's in the middle. And if I drag across even further, it's telling me it's aligned to the right. Now the same is true if I was to drag this square to the side of the circle. You can see that I still get those alignment guides. So it's telling me it's aligned to the bottom, to the middle, and then to the top. So I'm going to grab this circle, I'm just going to move it down, and I'm going to place this square just above. Now on the Home tab, we have an Arrange group. And in the Arrange group, we have some things that can help us when it comes to positioning. So I'm going to jump straight down to Spacing Options. And you can see here the default spacing options that are set. So the distance between shapes horizontally is 0.375 inches. Vertically, it's exactly the same. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change this to an inch. So let's type in number 1 and click on Apply. So what you'll see now is that when I drag this square around, if I drag it nearer the circle, can you see as soon as I get to within an inch distance away from the circle, I get that little double-headed green arrow. So that's telling me that when I let go, this shape is set to that default position 1 inch away from the other shape, and let go. If I was to drag the circle, you can see I get the same thing. So when I drag it near the square, as soon as that green double-headed arrow comes up, it's telling me that I am an inch away from the square. And this can really help you when it comes to positioning multiple objects on a page. Let's drag another shape onto our drawing. So this time I'm going to go for the octagon, and we're going to drag that down. Now if I drag this octagon up and start to move it towards the square, you'll see that I now get 2 double-headed arrows. So that's telling me that when I let go, the octagon is exactly the same distance away from the square is away from the circle. So I know that all 3 of those shapes are positioned correctly. So the dynamic grid is really useful when it comes to positioning things on your page. Another thing the dynamic grid can be useful for is resizing. So what I want to do here is I want to make the octagon the same size as the circle. So if I grab this resize handle and start to drag out, you can see that as soon as I get to the same size as the circle, I get those double-headed arrows display around the circle. So if I was to let go, I know that this octagon is exactly the same size. And I can now do exactly the same with the square. So if I start to drag this out and make it bigger, as soon as it's the same size, I'm going to see those green handles. There we go, let go, and I now know that all 3 of my shapes are exactly the same size. I can then use my positioning guides to get those into the correct spot. Now this is just one example of the alignment tools that are available in Visio. There is a whole toolbox of these, and we're going to explore more of them a bit later on in the course. But for now, turning on that dynamic grid is going to be really helpful to you, so make sure you have a tick in that box so that you can position your objects with maximum efficiency. That's it for this lesson. I will see you in the next one. Hello everyone and welcome back to this course on Visio 2019. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at rulers, grids and guidelines. And in the previous lesson, we've taken a look at the dynamic grid and how we can use that to help us when it comes to aligning shapes. So we're now going to delve into the other tools that we have available in Visio for aligning and positioning shapes on our drawing. And we're going to start out by taking a look at rulers. Now, if you take a look at the drawing that I have on the screen, you can already see that I have rulers turned on. So I have a ruler running horizontally across the top of the screen and also a ruler running vertically down the side. And in the middle, we have what we call the drawing window. And really all the drawing window is a rectangle that is bounded by the rulers. The current drawing is on a white page, and then behind the page we have this grey area that's not technically part of the drawing. And we call this grey area the canvas. Now before we move on, there is one setting that I want to point out to you. So we're going to jump up to the Design tab, and in this first group, the Page Setup group, you can see that I have Auto Size turned on. And I know it's turned on because it has that grey background. So this is one of those toggle buttons, so you can click it to turn it off and click again to toggle that back on. So I'm just going to toggle this Auto Size option off so I can show you the difference. So I'm going to select a shape from the basic shape stencil, and let's just go for this octagon. If I drag this and drop it onto the drawing canvas as opposed to on the drawing, this object essentially isn't part of my drawing. So if I was to print, it's not going to print out because it's not been included on my page. If I was to save this drawing, this shape will be saved even though it's not technically part of the drawing. It will be saved onto the canvas so I can come back in here and edit it. Now let's take a look at the difference if I just delete this shape out when we toggle Auto Size on. Let's do the same thing. I'm going to take my octagon, I'm going to drag it and drop it into the same place, but look what happens this time. Visio increases the size of the drawing. So you can effectively add shapes so that when you add them, the paper resizes to accommodate those shapes. So effectively now I have two pieces of paper, and if I was to print this out, it's going to print across two sheets. Now I'm just going to use my undo button just to undo that, and I'm actually going to toggle Auto Size off again. Now let's move back to just talking about our rulers. What you'll notice here is that the top left-hand corner of the page is lined up with the 0 point on the horizontal ruler, and the bottom left-hand corner of the page is lined up with the 0 point on the vertical ruler. Now you can change this origin position and move it to a different point on the ruler, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more later on. Now something else you can see on this ruler is scale marks. And these marks, although they do have a physical representation, they don't necessarily correspond to a physical measurement on the screen. So this drawing, for example, which was a blank drawing when I created it, if I measure this using a physical ruler on my screen, it's about 14 centimeters or 5 inches wide. And the height is about 7 inches or 18 centimeters. Now this has nothing to do with the marks on the ruler. If I was to take this drawing and look at it on another screen, then it would be different. So I'm using a reasonably large screen. If I was to look at this drawing on a laptop or maybe look at it on a tablet device, the physical size when I measure it with my ruler is going to be different because I'm viewing it on a bigger screen, but the actual representation of the size of the page in Visio is going to stay the same. So those markers represent something, but not physically how big it is. Now, one of the things that's useful with the ruler is that you can use it for positioning and aligning objects. So if I click on this square and just start to move it from left to right, and I want you just to ignore those dynamic grid positional arrows, I want you to take a look at the dotted line. So you can see a green dotted line there, which is basically telling me that this is lined up with a certain point on the ruler. So I can drag this all the way across, and you can see how that moves on the ruler with those small little dotted lines. So if I want to make sure this is lined up on the left-hand side with the number 2 on the ruler, just look at those lines as I drag across and let go. It's now perfectly lined up. So you can use that ruler to position objects and help with alignment. And the thing with those dots is that you can only actually see them when the shape is moving. So when I let go of this shape, those lines disappear. And this also works the same for vertical positioning. So if I was to again click on the square and move it up and down, if you take a look at my ruler, you can see those small dotted lines moving to show me where I have this object positioned. Now, if for some reason you decide that you don't want these rulers displayed, then you can turn these off and on from the View tab. In the show group, I have a little ruler box just here, which I currently have checked. If I deselect that, you'll see the rulers disappear, but in general, I find it helpful to have these turned on. Now, another thing I'm going to turn on in this show group is the grid. And just so we don't get confused, I'm also going to turn off the dynamic grid temporarily from the visual aids group. Now again, this grid can be used to help you align and position your shapes on the page. And there is a setting where you can change the granularity of this grid. So if you want to change the sizing of this grid, then you can definitely change that. From the show group, if you click the little diagonal arrow in the corner, that's going to open up the ruler and grid settings. And you can see that currently I have my grid spacing set to fine for both horizontal and vertical. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change this to normal for both and click on OK. And you can see the sizing of my grid changes. So now I can use this grid to align my objects on the page. So again, if I take this square, I can drag it across and use the grid to align. I could take my circle and I can drag that, and I can use the grid to help me position and align that object as well. Now, there are standard settings for this grid that have certain sizes for the squares of the grid, but you can set a custom size, so you can essentially tailor how big you want these squares on the grid to be. So again, if we jump into the show group and go down to grid, I'm going to change the minimum spacing from 0 inches to 2 for both the horizontal and vertical, and click on OK. And you can see now how that changes my grid. So if we now open up the drawing that we used in the first exercise, the drawing of our office layout, you can see some differences here with the drawing that we were just working on. Now, because this is an office layout, if you take a look at the ruler markings, you can see that those are actually feet markers. So in the top left-hand corner, we have 0 feet, because this is an office layout that uses feet measurements. So I can see here currently the entire office plan is roughly 22 feet by 17 feet. So I'm going to go back to my View tab, I'm going to turn my grid on, and I'm going to turn the dynamic grid off. Let's jump back into our dialog box where we can define our ruler and grid settings, and I'm going to set the grid to be 5 feet. And click on OK. So now I'm viewing my office layout in a slightly different way. I know that each one of these squares is 5 feet wide by 5 feet tall. So the grid is based on the dimensions of the object that you're working on. So now that we've explored the rulers and the grid, let's talk more about snapping. Now, snapping may or may not be a term that you're familiar with. You do tend to encounter it in other Microsoft applications outside of Visio. But if you're not sure what it is, let me show you what I mean. If I grab this circle and just start to drag it, you'll see that as soon as I drag it near a grid line, it kind of snaps to that grid line. And it is quite hard to see, but you'll see it kind of pulls itself towards that grid line and snaps it into place. And this is to help with the accurate alignment of your objects. As soon as you go close to a grid line, it pulls in towards it and snaps that object. And by default, Snap to Grid is enabled in Visio. And if you did want to disable that so you can do more granular alignments, if you jump up to the Visual Aids group and click the diagonal arrow in the bottom corner, you can see here it says currently active, and then I have Snap selected. So if I deselect Snap and click on OK, when I drag this object around now, it doesn't snap at all to that grid. And again, this is probably quite hard for you to see, but trust me, it just kind of moves past that grid line. I don't get that pulling sensation, that snapping to that particular grid line. Let's jump back into that Visual Aids dialog box. Now I'm going to turn Snap back on and jump across to the Advanced tab, because this is where I can come to change the strength of my snapping. And I can choose what I want to snap to, so I can snap to rulers, grids, guides, points, so on and so forth. And then I can use these sliders to say how strong or how weak I want that snapping to be. Now, I haven't changed these from the defaults, so I would suggest you jump into here and have a play around with these and set them so that they suit you and how you like to work. Now I'm going to jump back to the General tab and I'm going to turn the dynamic grid back on. So you can see that I can also do that from this dialog box just here. Place a tick in the box and click on OK. And I also want to double check in the show group that I have my guides turned on. Now I'm going to make this circle shape a little bit bigger. I'm going to move it down and I'm going to move my square across to the middle. Now, one thing you might notice is that the dynamic grid doesn't always work. So if I select this octagon and start to move it around, if I want to align this with the square at the top, you can see that I can't because the circle is in the way. So as I move, I can align it with the circle, but it's not showing me any guidelines for aligning with the square just above. Now, one way around this is to use guides for alignment. So I can add vertical or horizontal guides to my page. So let's first add a vertical one. I'm going to move my mouse all the way over to the side where the ruler is until I get that double-headed arrow. And you'll see that as I do that, I get a little pop-up screen tip that tells me drag to add a vertical guide. So if I click and drag across, it's going to give me a vertical guide, which I can then place anywhere. Now what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to align it at 2.5. And in my Visual Aids dialog box, I'm going to make sure that I have the glue option selected. And when I pick up my square and drag it towards that vertical guide, can you see I get that little green square pop up? And it says glue to guide. So if I let go, I can do exactly the same with the octagon. If I pick that up and move it towards the guide, as soon as I get close, it's going to say glue. I'm going to let go. Now, before I try and align this circle, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back into Visual Aids and I'm going to deselect glue and click on OK. Now I'm going to move the circle towards the guide and it snaps, so that's fine. I can let go. But look what happens if I now try and move this vertical guide. If I drag it over towards the left, you can see that because I've glued those two objects to the guide, those move when I move that guide, whereas the circle, which just snaps, it's not glued, stays in the same position. So two of these are glued and one of them is snapped. Now I could also do the same thing by having a horizontal guide, and it's worth noting that you can have as many of these guides on your page as you like. And if you want to delete any of these guides, make sure you're clicked on it and press the delete key on your keyboard. And the final thing I want you to note is that you won't see any of these guides when you print. That's it for this lesson. I will see you in the next one. Hello everyone and welcome back to this course on Visio 2019. It's now time for us to look at page setup and sizes. So for this, we're going to be working on the Design tab. And the first group that we have here is the Page Setup group. So let's dive straight into the dialog box by clicking the diagonal arrow, and let's take a look at what we've got in here. So in this Page Setup dialog box, we have 6 different tabs. Now, I don't want you to be too concerned about the last 2 at the moment. We're mainly going to focus on these first 4 tabs. Now, the first 3 of these tabs all relate to size. The next tab along, Page Properties, lets you specify if this page is a foreground or a background page. Now, we haven't covered that yet, so just hold that in your memory because we are going to come back to it a bit later on. And just as a side note, all the pages that we've created so far have been foreground pages. Now, something else you can also see in this tab is the name of the page. So by default, Visio gives all pages page 1, page 2, page 3, so on and so forth. And of course, you can change these pages much like you might rename a worksheet tab in Excel. So currently I have the default name of page 1, and I'm going to change this to Shapes Demo 01. And if there is a background page, of course, I can select it here. But as I said, we're going to come back to that a bit later on. Something else I can also do in this tab is I can select my measurement units. So if I click the drop down, mine's currently set to inches as the default, but I could have feet in inches, yards, miles, so on and so forth. And I also have decimal versions of these measurements as well. Now it's worth noting that depending on what template you use, some of the measurement units will already be defined in the template. But if you want to, you can jump into here and change those measurement units to suit whatever it is that you're doing. And you can change the measurement units for each page of your drawing. So if you have a drawing that has 6 pages, you could use a different measurement unit on each page if you wanted to. So let's click on Apply, and what you'll notice is at the bottom, the page has now changed to Shapes Demo 01. Now, these measurement units correspond to the size of the object or the entity being drawn. So when you're using Visio, it's likely that sometimes you will draw things that are physical entities and sometimes they aren't. So the shapes that we've drawn so far on this particular page are just shapes. They don't represent physical objects and therefore they have no physical size. And if I was to print this drawing, it would just look like some shapes on a page, some objects. There are other templates for things like flowcharts, again, which have no size associated with them. because they're not physical things. So in the case of something like a flowchart, the physical size and the drawing size is the same. So with that in mind, let's click across to the Drawing Scale tab. And if we take a look at the drawing scale for this page, you can see it has a 1-to-1 representation. So the physical size is the same as the page size. Let's switch across to exercise 1, where we have our office layout, and take a look at the difference. So if we look at the drawing scale for this office plan, in this case, we're representing a physical entity, an office. There is a physical size for the thing that we're drawing, so we use a scale to represent it. And there are a number of standard scales available. Now in this case, the template that I used has used the standard architectural scale. And aside from these predefined scales, you can also set your own custom scale at the bottom here. So what does this page represent? Well, it represents a drawing that is 22 feet by 17 feet. It's a physical size. And that is represented by that single page in the drawing. So given my drawing and the scale, it will fit onto one page. And my page size is one page of standard letter-sized paper. So if I wanted to print this, I could go to the Print Setup tab and choose the letter paper size. Now, if I did want to use a different size of paper, I could rescale the picture using Print Zoom. Alternatively, I could say that I don't want to rescale the picture, and I can specify that the picture can be spread across different pages. So if I wanted to here, I could change the printer paper size. So maybe I want to set it to the paper size that we generally use in the UK, which is A4. And then I could choose to print this drawing over multiple pages of A4. And we're going to be looking at printing in a lot more detail later on. So let's jump back to our office layout. And let's suppose we need to make the office longer. So I'm going to click on the outside boundary line to select the office. And you can see as soon as I do that, I get my measurements appear so I can see exactly what those sizes are. I'm going to grab this resize handle on the right hand side and I'm going to drag the office out a bit to make it longer. And you'll see as I do that, those measurements change. So now part of my office is outside of my drawing, it's actually on the canvas. So how can I accommodate this extra length? Well, I can click on the Auto Size button in my page setup group, which is going to expand that paper size out. Let's jump back into our page setup options, and you can see in the preview window here, the printer paper where that ends, and then the drawing paper. So essentially what Visio has done is given me a second piece of paper. I can see the page break down the middle, so I know that if I print this, it's going to print across two pieces of paper. Now, essentially what Visio has done here is it's made the decision for me. It's auto-expanded and given me a second piece of paper. And that's controlled underneath the Page Size tab. This first option here, let Visio expand the page as needed. If I didn't have this selected, then it's not going to give me that second piece of paper. So I'm going to cancel out of here. Now this time I'm going to make sure that I have auto size turned off. So when I drag the office out again, the picture is now too big to fit on the paper. So this time I'm going to jump into my page setup options and take charge of this myself by manually changing my page size. So let's jump across to the page size tab, and this time I'm going to use a custom size. And I'm going to change this to, let's try 14 inches and click on apply. I can see that just about accommodates it. Let's change this to, let's do 15 to give it a little bit more room and click on apply and OK. So now I have a bigger piece of electronic paper for this drawing. Now, if the custom size that I've set means that the drawing is going to go across two pages, what you'll see is a vertical page break line down your drawing. I don't have one of those currently, so it means that this is going to fit onto one page. And if I just quickly check my print preview by going to File and down to Print, I can see that yes, everything is fitting nicely on one page. That is it for this lesson. I will see you in the next one. Hello everyone and welcome back to the course. It is now time for us to do exercise 2. And in this exercise, I would simply like you to draw a set of traffic lights. Now this is going to be a bit different to simply drawing out this traffic light system, as I'm going to give you some exact measurements. So the paper size needs to be 120 millimeters by 240 millimeters, which is not a standard page size, it's a custom size. And I'd like you to use metric units. I need the body of the traffic lights, and when I say body, I mean the rectangular section without the pointy triangle on the top. I need the rectangle to be 80 millimeters wide and 160 millimeters high. And then each of these 3 traffic lights in the middle is 40 millimeters in diameter, and I want you to make sure that they are equally spaced from each other. And then finally, I want you to color in these circles using your shape fill commands. See how you get along with that? If you need to check my answer, you'll find it in the exercise files folder. That's it for now. I will see you in the next lesson. Hello everyone and welcome back to this course on Visio 2019. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at drawing tools. Now we've used some of these already in this course, but I'm going to explain to you in a little bit more detail how they work. Now, when you're putting together a drawing, quite often you're going to use shapes from your stencils. But it's worth remembering that you do always have an available set of drawing tools that can be useful to add squares, lines, circles to any drawing. So currently on the screen, I have the Course 05 drawing open on the screen. And what I ultimately want to do here is delete all of these shapes off of the page. Now, before I do that, I need to make a selection. So one way that I can select everything that I have on my page is to make sure that I'm clicked on my page and press the Control-A keyboard shortcut. And Control-A just really means select all. And then of course what I can do is press the delete key on my keyboard to get rid of all of those shapes. So now that we have essentially a blank canvas to work with, let's take a look at some of our drawing tools. And you'll find your drawing tools on the Home tab in the Tools group. And if we go up to this little icon just here where we have this blank rectangle and click the drop down, you'll see that we have 6 different drawing tools available. So I'm going to select the rectangle, and you'll see as soon as I do that, when I move my mouse back onto my drawing, the cursor is changed to a very small cross, and it's showing me a little graphical representation of the drawing tool that I've selected. So in this case, the rectangle tool. So all I need to do now is click and drag, and I can draw a rectangle of any size. Now you'll see that once I let go, if I drag my mouse around on the page, you can see that I still have that drawing tool active because I can still see that little icon. So if I want to draw another shape, I can simply carry on going. I don't have to reselect the rectangle tool. Now one thing you might notice is with these drawing tools, I don't have a square and I don't have a circle. Instead, I have a rectangle and an ellipse. So if I now wanted to draw a square, I would use the rectangle drawing tool, and when I drag, I need to hold down the Shift key, which is going to give me a square. And the same thing pretty much applies to if you're using the ellipse. You can see if I just drag, I'm going to get this oval shape. If I want a circle, hold down Shift when I drag, and it gives me a nice equal circle. Now, because the cursor stays in drawing tool mode once you've finished drawing your circle, if you want to exit out of this mode and just go back to your regular cursor or your pointer tool as we call it, you can just jump back up to tools and select pointer tool, and then your cursor will be back to normal. Now, with any of these shapes that you draw on the page, you can of course format them. So if I select this first rectangle and right click, I have a Format Shape menu item in my contextual menu. This is going to open up the Format Shape pane on the right hand side, and I can choose a fill color. So I'm going to say I want a solid fill, and I'm going to choose a color from the palette. So let's do a nice burgundy color. And the line controls the border of that shape. So again, if I want a solid line, I might say that I want a black border, and I'm going to change the width to 2 points. Click on the drawing, and you can see that formatting applied. Now I'm just going to undo those changes that I've made and take it back to a regular shape. If I decided that I wanted to format all of the shapes that I currently have on my drawing, again, I need to select them all by pressing Control-A. I can then use the Format Shape panel, and I can change all of them at the same time. Now we're going to be looking at formatting shapes and other items in a lot more detail later on in this course, but hopefully that gives you a better understanding of some of the basics. What I would recommend is that you now practice drawing some shapes on your page and maybe even utilizing some of the tools that we haven't used yet, such as the line, freeform, arc, and pencil. Have a little play around with that, see how you get on, and then when you're ready, you can join me in the next lesson. Hello everyone and welcome back to this course on Visio 2019. In this lesson, we're going to continue on the subject of shapes, but this time I'm going to show you how you can select shapes. Hopefully by this point in the course, you're comfortable with putting shapes on a page, and in Visio, you may have dozens or hundreds of shapes on a drawing. And it might be that you need to select one or multiple at any given time. Now, it's a reasonably simple process to select an individual shape. We can simply click on the shape, and once we see those little handles, those resize handles around the outside, we know that that shape is selected. But if you have a lot of shapes on the page, it's a pretty inefficient way of selecting shapes. For example, if I want to change the background fill color of all of these shapes, I could go through selecting them all individually by holding down my Control key and clicking my mouse, and that might work fine if I've just got a few on the page, but if I have a lot, particularly if those shapes are overlapping or they're quite small, that's a really inefficient and fiddly way of working. So I want to find a method of being able to select multiple shapes easily and then performing an action on all of them. So let's take a look at the different ways that we can make selections. So as we've seen, individual shapes can be selected by clicking, and then you can either hold down Control to select other shapes, or you can hold down the Shift key, which is going to do pretty much exactly the same thing. Now, one thing you might notice when I do this, if I just do that again, if I select these two shapes, you can see that I get a bounding box around the outside. If I now go and select the circle, that bounding box expands and it kind of gives the impression that all of the shapes are included within this selection. But they're actually not. Only the shapes that currently have a blue border around the outside are the ones that I have selected within this bounding box. So this rectangle in the middle and this square I didn't select. And so whilst they look like they're part of the selection, they're actually not. So just be aware of that. So now I have those three shapes selected, I can right-click my mouse and go to Format Shape. And then if I want to, I can change these to a completely different color. So let's make those purple. Another way to select multiple shapes is to draw a rectangle around them. And again, this might be a method that you're used to using in an application like PowerPoint. Now to do this, you need to make sure that you have the pointer tool selected. So you don't want to have any of these drawing tools selected. Make sure your cursor is an arrow, click your mouse and then just drag a rectangle around everything that you want to select. So if I want to select everything, I can do that. And you can see that all of the shapes have that blue border showing me that they're all selected. Let's click away. If I draw a rectangle around just these top two shapes, it will just select those two shapes. Now, what if I want to use this method to select shapes that aren't necessarily next to each other? So if I want to select all of the purple shapes, currently that's a bit tricky for me to do using the bounding box because it's going to include those red shapes as well. Well, in this case, I could use the lasso tool. So you'll find the lasso tool on the Home tab all the way over in the editing group on the end. Click the drop down underneath Select and you can see that currently I have Area Select highlighted. So that's the one that I'm currently using. That's the rectangle box that I'm drawing round. But if I choose Lasso Select, I can then use that to make more specific selections. So this time I can draw a freeform shape around what I want to select. So I want just the purple shapes. So I'm going to draw all the way around the outside, join it up, and now only those shapes are selected. And just for fun, I'm going to right-click, format the shape, and then I'm going to change the background fill one more time to this blue kind of color. Now I'm going to go back to that select option and I'm going to change this back to Area Select. Now if I draw a rectangle again, and maybe I only select half of the rectangle below, you can see that the rectangle isn't included in my selection because I didn't draw the rectangle around the entire shape, only part of it. So anything that's not completely enclosed within that rectangle box is not included in the selection. Now you can change this if you want to through your Visio options. So let's jump up to File and down to Options. I'm going to go to the Advanced page, and you'll find this under the Editing Options group. And it's this option just here, Select Shapes Partially Within Area. So if I select this and click on OK, now if I was to draw and partially select the third rectangle, it's going to include that in my selection. Now, when it comes to things like cutting, copying, and duplicating shapes, that works how you would expect. And I would say if you are reasonably familiar with other Microsoft applications, you're not going to have too many surprises just here. So let's click on the circle, and I'm going to copy this circle by pressing Ctrl-C, and then I'm going to press Ctrl-V to paste it. And you can see that the pasted copy appears slightly offset from the original. I can then drag that and position it wherever I like. Let's undo Ctrl-Z a couple of times. Now another thing I can do here is I can choose to paste my shape somewhere specific. So let's stick with our circle. I'm going to press Ctrl-C to copy. If I click somewhere up here in my drawing and do Ctrl-V, you can see it's going to paste wherever I'm clicked, and then I can move it into place. This time I'm going to select 3 different shapes by just dragging my rectangle tool around the outside. I'm going to do a Ctrl-C again to copy, and this time I'm going to paste them onto a new page. So all the way down to the bottom of the screen, let's click the plus to insert a new page. And if I do Ctrl-V, it's going to paste those shapes in exactly the same location as they are sitting on the original page. So that helps you achieve a level of consistency when you're copying and pasting shapes between different pages. Now, something else you might want to do instead of copying and pasting is simply duplicate a shape, particularly if you've made a lot of changes to the shape, formatting changes, and you want another shape that's basically exactly the same. Duplicate is a nice quick option. So let's take this rectangle at the top, and there's a couple of ways that I can duplicate. The quickest is to press the Ctrl-D keyboard shortcut to give yourself an exact replica. Let's Ctrl-Z to undo. The other way you can duplicate a shape is to hold down the Control key and drag and drop that shape, and it's going to give you an exact copy. So as I said, all of this functionality is pretty much standard across all of the Microsoft applications, but it's definitely something that you need to be familiar with in order to work efficiently in Visio 2019. Hello everyone, and welcome back to this course on Visio 2019. In this lesson, we're going to explore resizing and rotating shapes in a bit more detail, because these two types of operations can be particularly important. And I'm going to start out this lesson in a slightly unusual way. I'm going to start by issuing a warning. And I'm going to demonstrate the essence of the warning at the end of this section. And that warning is, when you use templates, it's possible that some of the shapes might be locked in some way. And I'll show you a bit later on how to recognize if a shape is locked. Now, a consequence of a shape being locked is that many things are restricted. For example, you can't resize a locked shape. Now, it might be that you receive a Visio drawing from a colleague or someone else, and there's nothing you can do about the fact that the shapes are locked. So you might just have to accept it. The alternative is knowing how to unlock shapes. Now, I just wanted to mention this right at the beginning of this lesson, because it might be that you receive a drawing with locked shapes in it, and you might be thinking that you're doing something wrong. So I just want to highlight to you that sometimes shapes are locked, which is going to prevent you from resizing, rotating, and basically doing anything with those shapes. So now we've got that warning out of the way, let's dive into speaking about resizing. Now, we've already explored this a little bit in previous modules. If I click on this first rectangle, you'll see I get those resize handles around the outside. And you might hear these also referred to as selection handles. And you can grab any of these handles and resize this shape. And remember, if you want to maintain the aspect ratio of the shape, use the diagonal handles in the corner to drag out, and it will resize accordingly. Now this time I'm going to select another shape. So I'm going to hold down Shift and I'm going to select the red square towards the bottom. Now remember, I only have 2 of those shapes selected within that bounding box. Now when I select multiple shapes, if I use these resize handles, that's going to resize both of these shapes. It doesn't resize anything else other than my selections that are contained within that bounding box. And resizing is pretty much as simple as that. Now for the next part of this lesson, I'm going to need to make sure that I have the dynamic grid turned on. So up to the View tab, and in the Visual Aids group, just check to make sure that you have a tick in the dynamic grid box. Now we've already seen how you can use the dynamic grid when it comes to resizing shapes. So if I select this red rectangle just here and I start to resize it, as soon as that rectangle is the same size as something else on that page, so in this case the green rectangle just above it, I'm going to get those dynamic grid handles. And the same thing with this circle, if I start to make that a bit smaller, as soon as it matches the dimensions of another shape that I have on my page, it's going to indicate that to me. So in this case, it is now the same size as the square. And what you'll probably find is that you use the dynamic grid for resizing a lot. So let's now take a look at some examples of rotating shapes. And you can see on my drawing here, I have a single shape. I'm going to select it, and you can see that right at the top, we have the rotation handle. And we've looked at this in previous lessons. I can click and I can drag it around in order to rotate this shape. Now, something that I haven't pointed out thus far is that if you look carefully inside the shape, you'll see a tiny little line going to another handle. And just to make this a bit easier to see, I'm going to format this shape so that it has a white background. So now that makes it a little bit easier. You can see that line moving towards a tiny circle in the middle. And that circle in the middle is essentially the center of rotation, or the pin as it's known in Visio. And when I rotate an object, I'm basically rotating around that pin. Now we're going to come back to this pin in a moment because it is very important. Now something else I want to show you is if we jump up to the View tab, and in the Show group, I'm going to click on Task Panes and I'm going to turn on the Size and Position task pane. And this opens up the Size and Position window. And this is a very useful window with positional information. So I can see the X and Y position, I can see the width of the shape, the height, the angle of rotation, which currently is 0 degrees, and the pin position, which currently is center. Now I'm just very quickly going to close this window by clicking on the cross in the bottom left-hand corner and show you a different way of accessing this information. You can see that when I have this shape selected, if you look down in the status bar, I can see the width, height, and angle information down here as well. Now, if you don't see these, then if you right-click on your status bar, you can customize the information that you're seeing. So I have all of these selected up here, width, height, length, and angle, so I can view this information without actually having to pull up that task pane. And what I can do is I can use this status bar, and if I click on where it says width, it's going to pop up that size and position window. And because I clicked on width, it's highlighting the width field. If I click on height, it's going to pop up the same box, but it's going to jump to the height field. Now, not only does this window give you information, it also lets you change the information as well. So I can change the height by clicking in the field, and I'm going to change this to, let's say, 2 inches. Hit enter, and you'll see that that shape has now resized. And because it's a square that I've drawn, it's going to maintain that aspect ratio and also modify the width. And what you'll see is if I click on this shape, pick it up and start to drag it around, the X and Y positions are going to change relative to where I've placed my shape on the drawing. If I grab the rotation handle and start to rotate it round, again you can see that that information is displayed in the size and position window. And if I wanted to, I could also manually set the angle of rotation. So let's say 35 degrees, hit enter, and it's going to rotate the shape accordingly. Now we mentioned pin position a bit earlier on in this lesson. And just as a reminder, the pin is that little circle in the center. and it's basically the point that the shape rotates around. So currently in my size and position window, it's telling me that my pin position is center, center. Now if I click in here and click the drop down, I have different positions for my pin. So if I select top right, for example, and then I rotate my shape, it's now going to rotate around a pin in the top right-hand corner. If I change it to, let's say, bottom left, it's going to rotate it around a pin placed in the bottom left-hand corner. So don't forget about these little options in the size and position window. Now let's take a look at one final thing before we finish up this lesson. I'm going to introduce a second shape. So let's jump back to our Home tab. I'm going to grab the ellipse drawing tool and I'm just going to draw an oval shape. Now, what would happen if I was to select both of these shapes? So let's hold down Shift and click on the square. We can see that the size and position window is just showing the information for the ellipse. But what if I was to jump into here and let's say change the height to 4 inches and hit enter? It changes both of the shapes because that's what I have selected. If I change the angle of rotation, so let's change this to 60 degrees, again, it's going to rotate both of the shapes. So you can essentially use this size and position window to set values for multiple shapes at the same time. So the final point I want to mention, and we are leaping ahead a little bit now, but I think this is important for you to know at this stage, and that is dealing with locked shapes. And I mentioned this briefly at the beginning of this lesson as a bit of a warning. So let's take a look at an example. I'm going to undo a few times just to reset these shapes back to how they were. Now, as we've already mentioned, if I rotate this shape, I have my pin position set to center center, and this is allowing me to rotate round that center pin position. I can also freely resize this shape. So currently, this shape doesn't appear to be locked, as I can perform these different actions on it. Now, in order to demonstrate locking to you, I need to make sure I turn on the Developer tab. Now, you may or may not have this turned on. I currently don't, which is why you can't see it as one of my tabs running across the top of the screen. And I would say in general, Developer isn't turned on by default, but it's simple enough to do. Let's jump across to the File tab, go down to Options, and we need to select the Customize Ribbon page. And on the right-hand side, this shows all of the tabs that we have enabled in Visio. And if you take a look 3/4 of the way down this list, you can see that we have Developer with no tick in the box. So let's tick this and click on OK. And the Developer tab is now showing at the top of the screen. Now there's lots of different things on this Developer ribbon. We're not going to look at most of them right now, but I do want to draw your attention to this Shape Design group, because that is where we will find our protection option. So this is essentially how you can lock a shape to prevent it being changed. And you have all these different things in here that you can choose from. So all of the different things you want to be able to protect. So I want to protect this shape from having its width, height, X position, and also rotation changed. And if I click on OK, what you'll now notice is that those resize handles now have a little line through them. So it's kind of like a no entry sign, basically telling me that this shape is locked and I can't resize it. And if I try and do any resizing, you'll see that that's not possible. You'll see that I can't move this shape from left to right because I've locked it, but I can move it up and down because the only thing that I left open was the Y position. So X is locked, I can't move it side to side, but Y, I can move it. So essentially you can choose to lock the entire shape, or you can lock specific elements to prevent anyone else from changing the shape. So that is locking, and I would say if you receive a Visio drawing and you see shapes that have these kind of handles around the outside, then you will find that you're limited in what you can do with that shape. That's it for this lesson. I will see you in the next one. Hello everyone and welcome back. By this point in the course, you should be reasonably fine with moving shapes around, resizing them and rotating them. So we're now going to move on to another important task, and that is connecting shapes together. So in this first demonstration, I'm going to show you how to connect shapes together that isn't particularly good. And then I'm going to show you some better options. So what I want to do here is I want to connect these two shapes, the square and the circle, using a straight line. So let's take a look at a method that works but isn't particularly the most efficient. So let's jump up to the Home tab, and I'm going to go to my drawing tools and I'm going to select line. And watch what happens when I drag my mouse close to the square. Connection points pop up on each side of that square, and if I hover over one, I get that green square and it says glue to connection point. So let's click and drag towards the circle. As soon as I get near the circle, again, I get connection points. So let's connect it up to this one. And I'm going to say, yes, glue to connection point. So essentially, this is now glued at both ends. Now there is a big advantage to this, and that is if I was to move this circle, then the line is going to move with it because it's glued to its connection point. And the type of glue that we've used here is referred to as static glue. Now there's one important aspect to this. If I click on the line again, you can see that at each end we have different coloured dots. So the one that's attached to the square is a solid green circle, whereas the other one is a white circle with a green dot in the middle. And this indicates two different types of glue that are being used. Now I'm going to delete out this line just by pressing the delete key, and I'm going to do this process again, but this time I'm going to do it wrong. So let's grab our line drawing tool, let's grab at a connection point, but this time instead of gluing to a connection point, I'm just going to glue to the outline of this circle. And you can see when I hover over the outline, not on a connection point, I get that little screen tip that says Snap to Geometry. So let's let go. So now my shapes are essentially only glued at one end because they're glued to a connection point on the square, but I just snapped to the geometry on the circle. So now if I was to move this circle, the line doesn't move with it because I've just snapped it. But if I move the square, the line does travel with it because it's glued at one end. And if I want to very quickly glue this circle back to the line, if I pull the circle over, I just need to make sure that I connect where I have that green square. And now it's glued at both ends. Now, whilst using glue is a really great way to connect two shapes, it does have its problems. So let's add in another shape. I'm going to add a triangle this time. And I'm going to delete out this connection line and place the triangle in the middle. Now I'm going to have a bit of a problem here because I want to connect the square to the circle, but the triangle is in the middle. So essentially I would need to go through that triangle. So we need to work out a way to draw around an obstacle. Now we're going to do this using something called connectors, but before we do, let me show you a bad way of doing this. So if I want to connect the square with the circle and avoid the triangle, I could choose to use a freeform line. So let's jump back up to our drawing tools and select freeform. So what I could do here is I could glue to connection point and then kind of drag around the triangle and connect to the circle. So that kind of works, but it is a little bit messy looking. It's not going to be good if you're trying to put together a professional looking diagram. It is also worth noting that with this freeform tool, you can see that we also have little connection points running along this line. And if I use my pointer tool to select it, I can move this line in and out to make further adjustments. Now what you'll see with this is that if I move the circle, the line is going to move with it, but at a certain point of moving this round, that line again is going to crash into that triangle. Now what I could do is I could make a modification and just drag it up so that it still avoids that obstacle. But all in all, this isn't a great way of doing this. It looks pretty messy and not very professional. So let's take a look at a much better way of circumnavigating obstacles. So let's delete out this line, get rid of that, and just move our circle back again and move our square up. So this time I'm going to use something called a connector. And again, you'll find this up in the Tools group on the Home tab, just below the pointer tool. So now, if I hover close to the square, I can click, drag, and connect to a point on the circle. And that point can be any one of these connection points. So let's say this one, glue to connection point, and you can see that Visio has intelligently worked out a route around the obstacle in the middle. And because we've glued, if I move this object down, it's going to move that path and work out the best route. Now, most of the time, Visio does a pretty good job at avoiding any obstacles, or if you do come across an instance where you want to move this line manually, then you can definitely do that as well, simply by dragging and dropping. Now, at this stage, if I was to delete out this triangle so there's no longer an obstacle there, Visio doesn't automatically change this connector, so it's taking the shortest possible route. I would need to change that manually. So because I'm just essentially joining two objects together, I don't really need this crazy route that it's taken. So I could drag it down and make that a little bit neater, or I could just delete the line entirely and basically start again. So select my connection point, like so. Now let's delete out this connector once again, and I've still got the connector selected, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to drag a line, but I'm not going to connect to one of the connection points. I'm going to connect to a different point on the circle. And you'll see as I hover over the border of the circle, it says glue to shape. So I've glued this connector to the shape as opposed to a connection point. And this is what we call dynamic glue. I could do this going the other way as well. So let's grab another connector. I'm going to click on a connection on the circle this time. I'm going to drag across towards the square. And you'll see that as soon as I drag away from that connection point, the entire square goes green. So at this time, I'm gluing to shape as opposed to a connection point. Let go. And then when I drag these around, they move with the shape. So now essentially I have two shapes connected using dynamic glue. As I drag these objects around, Visio adjusts those connection points at each stage. Now the final point I want to mention here before we leave this lesson is our glue options, because if we're going to be doing a lot of gluing, it's important to have these set correctly. So let's jump up to View and into the Visual Aids dialog box. And the column that I want to draw your attention to is this final column here, Glue To. Now, if you think you're going to be using dynamic glue and static glue a reasonable amount, you want to make sure you have shape geometry and also connection points selected in this column. That's it for this lesson. I will see you in the next one. Hello everyone and welcome back to the course. In this very short lesson, we're going to discuss one other topic about shapes before moving on to a different subject, and that is shape replacement. Now, this feature was introduced in Visio 2013 to cover situations where you have a shape in use in your drawing and you want to change it to another shape. Now, that sounds like a fairly simple thing to do, but believe it or not, it used to be the case that you would have to delete out the current shape and then insert a new one. So in this lesson, all I really want to show you is how you can change shapes in your diagrams. So for this, we're using our favorite office layout drawing. And maybe I want to change this waste paper bin to maybe a different type of waste paper bin, maybe a plant, maybe something else entirely. So essentially what I want to do here is I want to replace the shape. So all I need to do here is select the shape, jump up to the Home tab, and all the way over in the editing group on the end, you can see an option there for change shape. And the first thing that's going to pop up is the Office Accessories stencil. So this is essentially the stencil that the particular object that I've got selected is part of. And the good thing about this is that this is a live preview. So if I want to get an idea as to what this plant is going to look like, I can hover over, or maybe a square bin instead of a round bin. Now, if I want to choose a shape from a completely different stencil, if I click the drop down underneath Office Accessories, you can see I have access to cubicles, office equipment, office furniture, so on and so forth. I can even choose to select something from my quick shapes, so anything I've saved into there. And also I could choose to pull up just the shapes in use in this document. Now for this, I'm going to go back to Office Accessories, and I'm going to change this round waste bin to a square waste bin. Now, much like any other shape, I can also change multiple shapes at the same time. So these three plants that we have in the middle of the office, I can select all three by holding down my Shift key, go to change shape, and then I can choose to change all three of them to something else. So let's choose a flowering plant just here instead. Click, and all of those shapes are changed at the same time. That's it for shape replacement, short and sweet. I'm going to head over to the next lesson now, and I look forward to you joining me. Hello everyone and welcome back to the course. In this lesson we're going to talk about text basics, and we've already seen how we can add text and we've played around with text a little bit, but we're going to continue that on because, believe it or not, there is quite a lot to it. And the main thing I want to talk to you about in this particular video is text boxes versus text shapes. I want to make sure that you're clear on the distinction between the two. So I have course file 10 open on the screen, which currently doesn't have anything in it. So let's change that and grab a circle from our basic shapes and drag it onto the diagram. And I'm going to use my zoom slider at the bottom just to zoom in a little bit, so this is a little bit easier for you to see. Now, without clicking anywhere else, I currently have the shape selected, but if I start to type the word circle, you can see it appears inside a text box within the circle. And what you'll find is that most shapes that you'll use in Visio have text boxes already assigned with them. And if there is a text box, it's mostly there to identify the shape. And that could be any kind of shape, not just necessarily a basic shape. If maybe you've dragged something onto the office layout, for example, you might have a label inside which says desk or maybe plant pot or something like that. So much of the text that you see in a drawing is normally associated with a shape. Now, there is also a different type of shape called a text shape. And you would use text shapes to put text on a drawing that isn't necessarily associated with a specific shape. So you might use a text shape to put a title on the drawing. And you'll find that option on the Home tab in the Tools group, and it's this little option here which says Text, and you can see that there is a keyboard shortcut for that of Ctrl+2. So if I click this, I can go to the top of my drawing and I can add a text shape which contains something like a heading. Now we're going to come back to this and do some formatting a bit later on, but remember your text shape tool is still selected until you click back on the pointer tool to do something else. So we've seen text that's associated with a shape. We've seen how you can use the text shape option to add text that's not associated with a shape. And the third type of text is a text block. So let me show you a quick example. If I select this circle and then go up to the Home tab and back into that Tools group, there's another little option just here called Text Block. And what you can now see is that there is a rectangle around the outside of that text with sizing handles. So this is what I'm now looking at, a text block. So currently this text block is nearly as big as the circle, and you can see that I have the text in the middle. And what I can do here is I can change the size of the text and also the block. So if I wanted the word circle to appear towards the top, I can change the alignment within the text block. And I'm going to talk more to you about alignment a little bit later on. Alternatively, I could reshape the text block itself by dragging these resize handles in. Now, one thing that's worth noting is that not all shapes have text boxes right in the middle. So for example, if I open up the computers and monitors stencil, I'm going to grab the terminal shape and just drag and drop that onto my drawing. Now, if I want to identify where the text block is for this particular shape, what I need to do is make sure that I have the shape selected, up to my tools and click on Text Block. And you can see that the text block is underneath the terminal, and I have resizing handles so I can drag that out. So what I can do here is maybe type in a label, something like Debs, and that appears underneath the shape. So the point I'm trying to make here is that where that text block appears will vary depending on the shape. Now, if you have text blocks like this, you can move the block relative to the shape. So if I wanted this text block to be somewhere else, I could move it up onto that terminal screen. I'm going to use those resize handles. Let's drag it down a bit, and I've now got it positioned inside that screen. So you can move around those text block labels. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my basic shapes. I'm going to drag a circle onto the drawing and I'm just going to make that quite a bit bigger. And before I start typing any text into here, I'm going to apply some formatting to the text to make it a lot bigger. So up on the Home tab in the Font Formatting group, I'm going to keep the font on Calibri, but I am going to change the size to, let's say, 24 points. And I'm going to type in the word circle again. Now if I select the circle and I want to identify the text block, remember, click on the text block button and it's going to show you that. And what I'm going to do now is change the alignment of this text using the alignment tools in the paragraph group on that Home tab. So I could, for example, align this to the top of that text block. So don't forget about your alignment tools up here if you want to align something within your text block. Now I'm going to make this circle a little bit smaller, and you'll notice even though I'm making the circle smaller, the text size is staying the same, 24 points. Let's move that down a little bit, and I'm going to drag a square from my basic shape stencil and place that on the drawing. Once again, I'm going to change the font size to 24 points, and I'm going to type the word square. Now you can see at the moment that this square is essentially upright. But look what happens when I use the rotation handle to rotate this object around. As I rotate, the text also rotates with the square. Now that might be exactly the effect that you want to achieve, but sometimes you might want to be able to rotate the shape but have the text stay in the fixed position. So if I want to keep the word square horizontal and just rotate the shape, all I need to do is select the text block, use the rotation handle, and just rotate the text block back to where it should be. And now I have the shape rotated, but the text remains horizontal. So the point here is remember that these are independent of each other, so you can rotate the shape, but also choose if you want to rotate the text block as well as the shape. Now I'm going to put this square back to how it was. Let's select that text block and also rotate that back round. So now let's take a look at what happens if we use some connectors. So I'm going to connect the circle with the square. And we're going to do this by using a connector. So up to the Tools group and click on Connector. I'm going to select this point on the circle and I'm going to drag it across to this point on the square. And let's just make sure those are in line. I'm going to move the square down a little bit. Now, one thing that you might not be aware of is that connectors also have text blocks. So if I select the connector and click on Text Block, you can see those resize handles where that text block is. So let's give this a label. I'm going to call this Connector, and then I'm going to select all three shapes. So let's click back on our pointer tool. I'm going to draw a rectangle around everything. And look what happens when I choose to rotate all three objects. Notice that the text on the connector always stays upright. And that's because the text block on connectors will only align horizontally or vertically. So that's just another little tip that's useful for you to know. Now, so far we've been looking at text blocks associated with shapes. So let's now focus back on our text shape. And if you remember, this is what you use if you want to add text to a drawing that isn't necessarily associated to a shape. So something like a header, as we've used it in this example. And remember, once you have your text shape, you can then format it. So I'm going to click on Text Basics, and I'm going to use all of the tools in my font formatting group to change the way that this title looks. So let's make it bold. Let's increase its size to 36 points. Maybe I want to align that to the left, and I can also do things like change the color. And if I wanted to change something specific with one of these words, if I double click, I can then select a specific word, and let's just make this italics. Now, if you've used any other kind of Microsoft application, maybe Word or Excel, you'll probably find this pretty straightforward, as most of the options we're using here are exactly the same across all of the Microsoft applications. And of course, if we decided that we wanted to make a universal change to all of the text on our diagram, we can press the Control-A keyboard shortcut to select everything, and then maybe I could choose to change this to a completely different font. So let's go for something like this. So those are all the different ways that you can add text onto your drawing. That's it for this lesson. I will see you in the next one. Hello everyone and welcome back to the course. In this lesson we're going to talk about proofing in Visio. And by proofing I mean spelling and grammar checking. Now I would say that if you've used proofing tools in a Microsoft application before, maybe something like Word or Excel or maybe even PowerPoint, then you can probably skip this section as it does basically work the same. But if this is all new to you, then stay tuned because this is a very important aspect of using Visio. Now, the first thing I'd like to draw your attention to here is the help file on spell checking in Visio. We're going to cover some of these points, but there are a lot of other topics related to spelling and grammar that you might want to further explore and further read up about. So don't forget that you do have the help files there to guide you. Now, when it comes to spell checking in Visio, what I've found is that a lot of people don't consider it to be important. And that's mainly because Visio isn't technically a text-based package like Word. The essence of the work that you're doing here is creating drawings. However, some of those drawings, as we've already seen, will contain text, and you also might have some other miscellaneous text items on your page. So it is important to make sure that you are spell checking prior to sending this diagram to others. Now, a little bit of a word of warning before we get started. When it comes to labeling and putting text on drawings, the way that you do it might not be considered good and accurate grammar. And what I mean by that is that when you're labeling up something, we tend to use ungrammatically correct phrases when we're doing our labeling. And those phrases might be something that the spell checker flags as incorrect when it's actually as you meant it to be. So in some cases, the spell checker can be a little bit more of a hindrance than a help, but I'm going to leave that up to you to decide. So let's run through some of the basics of spell checking. Now, when you are spell checking in Visio, you really have two choices. You can spell check as you go, or you can spell check as a specific exercise at the end. So once you've completed your diagram, you might just want to run a spell check on the entire file. But let's talk about checking spelling as we go first. So what I'm going to do here is just add a rectangle shape onto the screen. And I'm going to make this text reasonably big. So let's make this 36 points. And I'm going to type the word rectangle, but you can see that I've made a spelling error. And if you have the option to spell check as you go turned on, you'll see that as soon as I type the space after the word rectangle, Visio has picked up that I've spelt this word incorrectly and it's highlighted it with a red squiggly line underneath. So that tells me that I need to take some kind of corrective action. So essentially what it's doing is it's flagging the errors as I type them. Now, some people really like that option. I am one of those people, and some people don't. So let me show you where you can customize this setting. If we jump up to File and go all the way down to Visio Options, and we want to make sure that we're on the proofing page. And right at the bottom here, we have when correcting spelling in Visio, check spelling as you type. And you can see that I have a check in that box. Now, if you determine after you've been using Visio for a while that this is more of a hindrance to you than a help and you'd prefer to just spell check at the end, you can deselect this option and you won't get those red squiggly lines when you make errors. Now, I'm going to leave mine checked and click on OK. Now, if Visio does flag an error as I'm typing, I can choose to correct it now, or I can choose to correct it at the end. Now, if I wanted to correct this now, the quickest way of doing that is to right-click on the word, and you can see at the top here, it gives me a couple of other suggestions. So Visio has worked out that I was probably trying to type the word rectangle, and that is the first choice that I have at the top of the list. I can also choose to ignore. So if this is actually a valid word, and sometimes Visio will pick up things like people's names or maybe countries or names of brands, and because it doesn't recognize them, it flags them as errors and they might not necessarily be errors. So you can choose to ignore, or you can choose to add that word to the dictionary. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that a bit later on. For the time being, I'm going to make the correction. I'm going to select the first item in this list and change that to rectangle. Now, if you don't want to flag errors as you type, you can at any point invoke the spell check. And there's a couple of different ways that you can do that. You can go up to the Review tab, and in the proofing group, the first option you have there is spelling. And you'll see as I hover over, I get that screen tip, and you can see the keyboard shortcut, and that is F7. So you can invoke this at any point, or you can wait until the end when you've completed your diagram, and then just press F7 to bring up that spell check. So once again, you can see that it's starting at the beginning of this drawing. It's picked up the word rectangle, that isn't in the dictionary, and it's suggested the word rectangle. So you're always going to see all the different suggestions from here. If the word you meant to spell is in there, just select it and then click on change. Now the other options that you have are you can choose to ignore, and in general I would use ignore if it's a word that I've actually spelt correctly, but Visio for some reason just isn't recognizing it. And if I have that word repeated throughout the drawing, I could choose to ignore all so it doesn't keep flagging it. Another thing I could do is add the word to the dictionary. So again, this is a good option if it keeps picking up things like company names, people's names, things that you know are spelt correctly. It's just not being recognized by Visio's internal dictionary. Once you add a word to the dictionary, it will no longer flag as a spelling error. But in this case, I want to change it to rectangle, so I'm just going to click on the word change. It then moves on to the next misspelt word, which in this case is ellipse. I can see that yes, I meant to spell it like the suggestion, so I'm going to say change. And then finally we have the word freeform, and I'm going to change that as well. Once I'm done, it's telling me that my spelling check is complete, so I can click on OK. So those are your two options. You can check as you type, or you can invoke F7 and check at any given time. Now the final option I want to talk to you about is autocorrect. And you might want to use autocorrect to correct common spelling mistakes that you might make. And you can also use it as a way of inserting special characters. For example, maybe one mistake that I often make is that I type two capitals at the beginning of a word. And I would like Visio to correct this for me. Now, believe it or not, this is a fairly common thing that people tend to do. If you're holding down the caps lock when you're typing in a capital letter, it's very easy to still have it held down when you're typing the second character. So you end up with two capital letters at the beginning of a word. So we want Visio to autocorrect that for us. And something else I want Visio to do is add a copyright symbol. So if I go down to where it says freeform, I'm just going to double click to edit this text, and we're going to pretend that I accidentally typed in two capital letters at the beginning of this word. So I want my autocorrect settings to pick this up and change it for me. So we're going to go back up to File, into our Visio Options, and into Proofing. So let's go into Autocorrect Options, and you'll see the first option that we have here is Correct two initial capitals. So I want to make sure that I have a tick in this box. Now, if you look further down this same page, there are also some key sequences to put in special characters. So you can see here that to insert a copyright symbol, this is what I need to type. So bracket C bracket. If I want to insert a euro symbol, I type in bracket E bracket. So I can use these as a shortcut way of easily and quickly entering in these types of symbols. So let's click on OK and click on OK again. Now I'm going to delete out this word and I'm going to type in freeform. And you'll see as soon as I hit space, it's going to correct that and remove that capitalization. And if I wanted to add a copyright symbol into this document, I just need to type bracket C bracket. And again, when I hit space, it's going to autocorrect that to the actual copyright symbol. So those are your proofing tools and also your autocorrect tools. Definitely worth reviewing them. And remember, if you want to read up more about proofing, you have those help files that can guide you in the right direction. That's it for this lesson. I will see you in the next one. Hello everyone and welcome back to the course. It's time for us to do exercise 3. And in this exercise, I would like you to draw a diagram of your home network if you have one. If you don't, maybe you have a network at work that you can use, or maybe you can think of some other kind of network to draw. If you don't have any of those things or nothing springs to mind, you can basically use my drawing and just recreate the network that I have here. Now, a couple of little tips before you begin. Remember that each of these shapes has its own text block. There is also a drawing title. Now I've connected most of these shapes together, but what you'll notice is that for the ones that connect to the wireless access point, I have a different type of shape here. So these aren't necessarily connectors. So I've used one of the standard shapes to indicate a wireless connection. And that is this symbol you can see in between these shapes just here. And really, I've done it in that way to indicate the difference between wired and wireless connections. So see if you can also work out how to do that. That should be enough for you to be getting on with. As always, you can check my answer in the exercise files folder. That's it for now. I will see you in the next lesson. Hello everyone and welcome back to the course. In this lesson, we're going to explore the different ways to pan and zoom around the diagram. And we've already seen some aspects of zoom so far in this course, but there are a few other features that are definitely worth knowing about. So why do we need to pan and zoom? Well, whatever size of diagram that you're working on, if it has a lot of detail, there might be times where you need to really get close in and work at a very fine level. Indeed, if it's very large, you may need to zoom in to see exactly what it is that you're doing. And one of the problems that you might find is that if you are zoomed in and you need to see a different part of the diagram, there is this tendency to zoom all the way back out and then back in again on the new location. Now you can avoid this by using the pan feature. And what pan allows you to do is pan around the page and keep the same magnification. So by using the pan and zoom window, this is going to make your life so much easier when it comes to working with large drawings. So I'm working in course file 11. Now we've already looked at how to zoom in and out. We can use our zoom slider in the bottom corner, and we can move up and down using our scroll bars. Now something you might have already discovered when you're using zoom is that it is a little bit frustrating when you're trying to zoom into a specific place in your diagram. So let me show you a couple of techniques to make this a bit easier for you. And the first one is zoom to selection. So let's say that you want to zoom into this drawing and work on the triangle and also the square. If you hold down the Control and Shift key, you'll see that the cursor changes to that small magnifying glass with the plus inside. And all you need to do is drag a rectangle around what you want to zoom into. When you let go, it's going to zoom in to your selection. And you can use that tool on any part of your drawing. If I wanted to use this again and zoom in on just the triangle, I could do exactly the same thing. Control Shift, drag a rectangle around the triangle, and it's going to zoom in to just the selected item. Now, when you want to zoom back out again, if you press Control Shift W, that's going to take you back to your original view. You can also zoom using the scroll wheel on your mouse if you have one. And remember, if you are using the scroll wheel to zoom, you need to hold down the Control key, scroll your mouse up to zoom in, and scroll it back to zoom out. Now there is another option that you can use when it comes to zooming, and that is called Center Selection on Zoom. And this is actually an option that you need to turn on in your Visio options. So let's dive into the File menu, down to Options, and we'll find this in the Advanced page. And it's this option just here underneath Editing Options, Center Selection on Zoom. Now I will say that most of the time I have this turned off, but let me just demonstrate this to you. Let's turn it on and click on OK. And let's select any shape on this drawing. So I'm going to go for this diamond at the top. Now, if I use my scroll wheel on my mouse to zoom in, you can see that whatever object I have selected, it's going to make that the center of the zoom. So now we've seen all the options that we have when it comes to zooming. Let's now switch our attention to the pan and zoom window. Now the first thing you need to do is go down to your status bar and right click your mouse. And you want to make sure that you have the pan and zoom window item checked. When you do check this, if you take a look at the bottom right hand corner of the status bar, you'll see that you have a little icon here, which is your pan and zoom window. Now another way to get to this pan and zoom window is to use the View tab and turn on the pan and zoom task pane. So let's zoom in on our drawing. I'm going to select the circle, hold down Control, and I'm going to zoom in. And you'll notice that what I can see is represented in the pan and zoom window by the rectangle. So if I'm zoomed into this level of magnification and then I decide that I want to see something else that's on the page, instead of zooming out, I can just use this pan window and I can drag it around and I keep the same magnification wherever I go. So this is useful if you are working on the finer detail of a diagram and you don't want to have to keep zooming out and zooming in. You can just pan around. And of course, there are a few different things that you can do with this blue rectangle in the pan and zoom window. For example, I can resize this so I can make it smaller, or I could even make it a bit larger and include more within that pan window. I can also use this slider along the side to zoom in or zoom out, and you'll see that that rectangle changes in size as I do this. Now, another thing you might want to do with this pan and zoom window is you might not find it particularly convenient having this down in the right-hand corner. If you right-click on the pan and zoom heading on the side there, you have an option to float the window. And this means you can then pick it up and then you can place it wherever you like. And one thing you'll notice is that if I drag up towards the ruler, I get the option of kind of snapping it and having it as a pane on the screen. Now, in general, I don't particularly like this. I think it takes up quite a bit of room. I prefer to have it as a little window, but sometimes I do like to be able to change the position. And a lot of the time, I do like to have it in the left-hand pane underneath my stencils. And of course, once you've finished with the pan and zoom window, you can click on the cross in the top right-hand corner just to close that down. And I'm going to finish off by doing Control-Shift-W to take me back to my original view. So that's a few more tips and tricks on zooming, and also I've introduced to you there the pan and zoom window. That's it for this lesson. I will see you in the next one. Hi guys, and welcome back to the course. In this lesson, we're going to cover some important topics related to the Visio workspace, and more importantly, saving the workspace. Now, this is done automatically when we save and close a file. And if you're curious as to what I mean by workspace, well, in this particular document that I have open, the workspace comprises of the ribbon and the quick access toolbar, the shapes window that we have running down the left-hand side, the actual drawing, the drawing window in the middle, and also the status bar. Now, all of these things combined together are the workspace. Now, it might be that you have additional windows open in your workspace, such as the size and position window that we were just looking at. And if you take a look down at the zoom slider in the bottom right-hand corner for this particular file, you can see that it's zoomed in to 65%. And in general, what happens here is if I close down this file and then reopen it, some aspects will go with the drawing and some of them don't. So I'm going to select File and Save. And then I'm going to close down this file. Now, the other drawing that I have open here is my answer to exercise 3. You can see that I have the shapes window open, and what I'm going to do here is just minimize that shapes window down to collapse that up. I'm also going to change the zoom level for this drawing to 200%. So let's go to View and Zoom and select 200 and click on OK. I'm also going to open the size and position window. And remember, there is a couple of ways that you can do this, but as we're already on the View tab, we might as well do it from task panes. Select size and position to open that window in the bottom left-hand corner. So now I'm also going to save, and then I'm going to close this file down as well. Now watch what happens. If I go back and open up course file 11, you'll open that it opens with a zoom of 65%, which is what I saved it with. But what you'll also notice is that the shapes window is minimized and the size and position window is visible. So these were the settings that I set when I last worked on the drawing, even though it wasn't this drawing. I made these changes in the exercise 3 file. So hopefully that illustrates quite nicely that some of the settings, such as zoom level, will go with the drawing, whereas others will display depending on how you last used them. So let me expand the shapes window out again, and I'm going to close down the size and position window. I'm going to save and close this down. Let's go back in and let's now reopen exercise 3. You can see that it's still zoomed in to 200%, which is what it was when I last saved it. It still has the computers and monitors stencil open, but I don't have open that size and position window. These two items are reflecting what I last did in the last document I had open. So some things are specific to the drawing and get saved, and some are how I left them when I closed. So hopefully that illustrates how the workspace works. Now, another thing you might want to consider doing when you're looking at your workspace, your work area, particularly if you're using a device with a small screen, you might want to give yourself a bit more working space by collapsing up the ribbon. Now, the ribbon is obviously extremely useful. It contains all of our commands, but it does take up quite a bit of space at the top. And there might be times when you're working on a particularly large drawing when it's going to be beneficial to you to temporarily collapse up the ribbon. And this is a fairly straightforward thing to do. If we jump up to the ribbon all the way over on the right hand side, you can see that there is an up arrow. And if I hover over, it says collapse the ribbon, and there is a keyboard shortcut for this of Control F1. So now I have a lot more room to work on my drawing with, but obviously I can't see any of my commands. I can, however, still see those tabs. So if I need to grab a command, if I know where that command is located, I can go directly to the tab. And this is probably something you'll find you use more when you become more familiar with Visio and you start to know where certain commands are located on the ribbons. Now, if I do want to access a ribbon at any given time, I can just click on the tab and it's going to drop down. If I'm not sure where my command is, I can still carry on going through until I find exactly what I'm looking for. And when I move away from the ribbon and click back on my drawing, that ribbon is going to collapse up again. Now, if at any point you decide that you don't want this to be collapsed any longer, then there's a couple of ways that you can essentially pin this ribbon back in place. If you right-click anywhere on the ribbon, just take the tick out of collapse the ribbon, or alternatively, you can click on the pin icon, Control F1 on the right-hand side, and that's going to pin that ribbon back in place, and you can then see all of your commands and also the quick access toolbar. That's it for this lesson. I will see you in the next one. Hi guys, and welcome back to the course. In this lesson, we're going to talk about some automation features that can really help you work quickly with some types of drawings and in some situations. And I should probably point out that how they work will depend on some of the Visio options that you have set. So we're going to start out by taking a look at something called Autoconnect. Now, before we do, we're going to jump into those Visio options and just set up everything correctly. So let's go into File, all the way down to Options, and we want to make sure that we're on the advanced page. In the editing group, we want to make sure that we have Enable Autoconnect selected. If you don't have a tick in the box, pop one in there now and then click on OK. Now, a couple of other things that you need to check. On the View tab in the Visual Aids group, also make sure that you have Autoconnect selected. Once you have both of those options enabled, we can then utilize the Autoconnect facility. So let me show you how it works. Now, what I'm intending to do here is build some kind of network diagram. So I have open in my Shapes pane the Networks and Peripherals stencil. So I'm going to grab the router just here, and I'm going to drag that onto my diagram. Now, with a network diagram, I'm probably going to have some other things coming off of this router. And to make it super simple, I can utilize the Autoconnect feature. So notice what happens when I hover over this router. Can you see that I get those 4 blue arrows around the perimeter? And these are called your Autoconnect icons. So if I want to add and auto-connect another shape in the drawing, I can simply hover over one of those blue arrows. So if I hover over the one above, you can see that it shows 4 icons. And those icons are the first 4 of my quick shapes for this particular stencil. So if what I need to add here is a server, all I need to do is hover over the server. And when I click, it's going to add that shape, and it's also going to add a connector as well. And that is basically what Autoconnect does. If I hover over my router again, you can see that this time I only get 3 arrows because I've already utilized one of them. So if I wanted to add maybe a switch, now a switch isn't one of my first 4 shapes in my stencil. And so I'm not seeing it as an option in that Autoconnect box. So a way that I can get around this is by selecting Switch in the stencil first. And then when I hover over, you can see automatically it's going to give me a switch. And all I need to do is click to apply it. If I wanted to add something from another stencil, I could pretty much do the same thing. So if I scroll up through my stencils and go to computers and monitors, maybe I want to add a PC. So if I select it in the stencil first and then hover over my router, and let's go for the down arrow, you can see there is the PC. I can click and it's going to add that in with a connector. So this is a really nice quick way of being able to build your diagram. Another thing to bear in mind when you're using this, as it's only going to show the first 4 items that you have in your Quick Shapes menu, remember that we went through previously how you can add things to Quick Shapes and also how you can reorder those items. So if there's shapes that you always use, you might want to make sure that those are the first 4 in your Quick Shapes. Let's move on now and talk about another automation tool that we have called AutoAdd. And for AutoAdd, I'm going to use the example of a flowchart diagram. And we're starting this flowchart from scratch. You can see I have my basic flowchart shapes loaded up in my stencils. So I'm going to grab the start here and drag that up to the top of my drawing. I'm going to use Autoconnect to add a process box, which is this one just here. I'm going to add another process box, another one, and then finally I'm going to add an endpoint. Now, what if I decide at this stage that I need to introduce a process box in between the first and second process boxes just here? Well, in theory, I would need to delete out the connector, put the new process box in there and move the 2 below it to space things out evenly, or use 2 more connectors. But we don't need to mess around with all of that. We can just employ AutoAdd, which is going to do it for us. So I'm going to grab the process box and I'm just going to drag it in between the 2 process boxes that I already have. And you can see that the ends of those connectors have changed to green squares, which means that AutoAdd is going to be used. If I let go, Visio is going to insert that new process box in the correct place with connectors. And this can be a real time saver, as it saves you a lot of messing around, deleting out connectors and process boxes and shuffling other things around. So essentially what Visio does here is it moves parts of the diagram around to accommodate the new shape. And when it runs out of space, it can do some strange things, so you may need to intervene and make some manual alterations. And what you can see here is that now my flowchart has extended down onto the second page. Now the final automation feature I want to speak to you about is something called AutoDelete. And this is used when you want to get rid of a shape. So let's select one of these process boxes. If I hit the delete key, you can see that the process box has been deleted and the 2 connectors have now been replaced with 1. Now at this stage, it's probably good for you to also double check your Visio options when it comes to auto deleting. So once again, we're going to go up to File and Options, and we want to go to the Advanced page and make sure that you have this option selected, Delete Connectors when deleting shapes. I would also advise you to turn on Enable Connector Splitting. Let me show you what happens if I deselect this. If I now try to introduce a new process box to this diagram, you can see that I don't get those green connectors. And if I let go, the flowchart kind of organizes and completely misses out this new process box because it doesn't realize that it's part of the same diagram. So that is a really, really important little option if you want to use these features. So definitely make sure you have this turned on. That's it for this lesson. I will see you in the next one. Hello everyone and welcome back to the course. In this lesson and the next couple of lessons, we're going to take a look at organization charts, or org charts as they're referred to. And org charts have been part of Visio since the beginning. And many people use Visio to maintain their organization charts. So if you need to maintain them from data, maybe an HR database, you can do that automatically from Visio. And whilst many of the things that we're going to be covering over the next few lessons specifically relate to org charts, many of the tools and techniques that I'm going to show you can also be used more widely as well. Now, if you're unsure what I mean by the term org charts, well, it depicts an organization, a management hierarchy. You might have an organization chart on the wall where you work, where you have your manager at the top, Then you have the people that work directly for him, maybe the team leaders, and then you have the people that report into them. Now, organization charts are not just used in work environments, they do have other purposes. So maybe you have the president or prime minister at the top, and then you have all of the roles that report into him or her. And also many scientific structures could be represented with org charts. So for example, the taxonomy of all the animals in the world. So what I'm trying to say is it doesn't just relate to management structures. However, that is how we're going to use it in this example. Now what we're going to do in this first lesson is I'm going to show you how you can draw an organization chart manually. And then in the next section, we're going to basically do a similar thing, but I'm going to show you how you can use the org chart wizard. And then finally in the third section, I'm going to show you how you can style your organization charts. So let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's start off with building a manual organization chart. So the first thing I'm going to do here is jump up to File and down to New. And if we take a look at our templates, you can see that I have the organization chart template sitting just here. Now for this one, I'm actually going to use metric units instead, and I'm going to click on Create. Now notice the organization wizard has popped up, and we're going to look at this and build an organization chart using this wizard in the next section. So for the time being, I'm just going to cancel this window. Now another thing to note is that now that I've loaded up this template, you can see that I have a new ribbon, the org chart ribbon, which contains lots of different commands and tools that's going to help me build and style up my organization charts. And another thing you might notice is that this particular template has its own stencil. So if you take a look, we have organization chart shapes, and then we have different masters that we can use to build our organization chart. If I hover over the first one, the executive belt, you can see it says in the screen tip, drag onto the page, then drop positions that report into this one directly on top of it. So we have a little bit of guidance there as to how to build up our chart. Now in general, the executive belt is reserved for CEOs, people at that top level. Now before we start to build out this organization chart, I just want to draw your attention to this shapes group on the org chart ribbon. You can see here that the first one we have is belt. The next one along is notch, the next one along is pip, so on and so forth. And these are effectively different styles for your masters. And this all really comes down to a matter of personal preference. How do you want your shapes to look in your organization chart? Now for this example, I'm just going to stick with the default, which is belt. Now what I'm going to do before we get going is quickly save this file. So I'm going to do that off camera and I'll rejoin you in a couple of seconds. So let's start building out our organization chart. So the person right at the top of the pile is going to be the CEO. So I'm going to grab the executive belt master from my stencil, and I'm going to drag and drop that onto my page right at the top. Now let me zoom in a little bit so you can see this a little bit clearer. And you can see that I have two text boxes, one for the title and one for the name. So I'm going to double click in title and we're going to change that to CEO. And then I'm going to double click in the name and change that to Diane Dixon. Now there are three managers that report into Diane. And as we saw from that screen tip, when you're adding subordinates, essentially, you need to drag and drop them onto the person that they report into. So in this case, Diane. Now these people aren't the executive belt, they're the next level down. So we want to go to the manager belt. So let's click and drag and drop on top of Diane, and you can see it automatically creates that subordinate link. It also adds a connector, creating a relationship between these two different shapes. So let's go in and add a title for this person, and this one, let's just add my name just here, and I am the accounts director. Now I'm going to add two more managers and I'm going to do them in exactly the same way. So join me in a couple of seconds when I'm done. We're now going to add in some more people into our organization chart. And you can see I'm over here on the left hand side. That's me, the accounts director, and I have one person reporting to me. So for this one, I want to grab the position belt master. I'm going to drop it on top of my card and it's going to add my subordinate. Let's add in this person's name. And one other thing to note here when you look at these masters is that you do have one called vacancy belt. So if you essentially have an open position in your hierarchy, then you can utilize this master. So let's drag it and drop it on top of mine. Maybe I have a position open in my team. You can see that it doesn't have a little placeholder for a picture because this is a vacancy, but I can double click to edit this text, and I might want to say this position is open and the position is Senior Accountant. Now, as you've probably already noticed, most of these masters that we're adding have this little head and shoulders icon. And these can be replaced with the actual photos of these different people. And I'm going to show you how you can do that a little bit later on, but for the time being, we're just going to leave them as they are. Now, another master that you have here is the assistant belt. So for example, and I'm just going to zoom out a little bit here, the CEO, Diane Dixon, she has a PA. So I'm going to use the assistant belt, drag it on top of Diane Dixon, and you can see that now this person is an offshoot of Diane. Now the assistant isn't the manager of any of these people below, which is why they don't really have a relationship with these managers, but they are directly connected to Diane. So let's replace the title here. And I'm going to say PA. And there we go. So if I zoom out so you can get a better overall view, you can see we're well on the way to creating a really nice looking organization chart. Now, very often when a template like this is built, the designer of the template will have included some shortcuts for you, some time-saving tools. And in these organization chart templates, there are a few that are useful. Now, when drawing out this structure, one of the masters that we have available is 3 positions. So I'm going to say that Carl over on the end here, and let's zoom in a bit again, has 3 people reporting into him. So instead of adding these positions one at a time, I could grab 3 positions, drag and drop it onto Carl, and it's automatically going to add 3 people into my organization chart. So this is a really nice time-saving utility. Now I'm just going to quickly jump in and add in the titles and the names for each of these people. So join me back here again in a couple of seconds. Now a more sophisticated option is multiple shapes. So I'm going to grab the multiple shapes master and I'm going to drop this onto Bryony Borelli. As soon as I do that, I get this pop-up window where I can make some selections. So I can now choose how many shapes I want. So technically, how many people report into Bryony? Well, I'm going to say that Bryony has 5 people reporting into her. Are these executives, managers, positions? Well, I'm going to select position and click on OK. And you can see now I have those 5 different positions added underneath Bryony. So a really good time-saving feature. Now notice how, now that I've done that, the organization chart no longer fits on one sheet of paper. Now Visio does a really good job of laying out an organization chart, but looking at this, I could probably, with a little bit of jiggery-pokery wizardry, I could probably try and fit this all on one page. So I'm going to try a few different things in order to try and get all of this information onto one piece of paper. Now the first thing I could do is go up to the Org Chart tab and look in the Layout group. You can see that one option that I have there is Re-Layout. Now I would recommend that if you are going to use this button, you maybe use it at the end. So when you finish putting together your organization chart and you know that you're not going to be adding anything more to it. Because once you relay this out, if you then decide that you want to change it, you're probably going to end up having to do it all over again anyway. So I would leave this until last. Now, in the case of this particular organization chart, I've pretty much finished, so I'm going to click Relay Out. Now, it did a little bit of something just there, but if I scroll down, I can see that it hasn't helped me with my problem of this organization chart spilling onto a second page. So I need to maybe try something else. This time I'm going to go back to my layout group and I'm going to try using this best fit to page option. Let's click. I can see again it's done something. Let's scroll down, but nope, not quite. I'm still spilling onto that second page. Another option that you have is located in the Arrange group. You can adjust the spacing, so you can increase the spacing between the organization chart shapes, or you can reduce the spacing. So let me zoom out so I can see the bottom of my chart, and I'm going to try and decrease the spacing. Now there's only so far that Visio can decrease the spacing between your shapes, and I can see that it's not really doing anything, so I've pretty much hit that limit and I'm still spilling onto that second page. So what else can I do here? Well, maybe I don't necessarily have to be able to see all of Bryony's subordinates. So if I click on Bryony and then back up to the Arrange group, I can say Hide Subordinates. And you'll see as soon as I do that, I get an icon in the bottom corner which lets me know that there are subordinates. And if I want to show them again, I just need to click that button. But I'm going to hide these subordinates. And when I do hide them, of course I can fit everything onto one page. However, what if I do want to show those? So let's show them again. And let's try something else to rearrange this chart. You can see at the moment my shapes are fairly concentrated in the middle of this page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my name and I'm going to drag myself all the way over to the left-hand side. And then I'm going to grab Carl and I'm going to drag him all the way over to the right-hand side. Now what I'm going to do is draw a big selection box around all of these subordinates, and I'm going to change the width of these different shapes. So again, up on the Org Chart tab, I'm going to use my width plus and minus just here. So let's decrease the width of these particular people. I think that's good enough. And then the final thing I could consider doing is selecting all of these shapes and then choosing to redo the layout. So if I go up to the Layout group and click the Layout drop-down, I'm going to change this to a horizontal center layout. And there we go. So hopefully you can see that that now looks a lot better, and I now have the organization chart fitting onto one page. That's it for this lesson. I will see you in the next one. Hello everyone and welcome back to the course. In this lesson, we're going to look at creating an organization chart using external data. And the data that I'm going to be using is stored in an Excel workbook. Now, Visio can get data for organization charts and many other types of chart from different external sources. And I'm going to talk more about data and also something called shape data later on. Now, many of the sources that you can get data from are kind of specialized. For example, I can get data from Access databases, external ERP systems, and also resource planning systems. So to make this demonstration as simple as possible to understand, I've chosen an external data source that isn't particularly specialized. So we're going to be using Microsoft Excel. Now, this is a relatively straightforward data source, but it supports the data structures that you see in organization charts. So in column A, we have the name of the staff member. In column B, we have their role. Column C, we have who their manager is. And then column D, the employee number. And column E, their start date. Now in this example, we're going to be ignoring columns D and E, so don't worry too much about those. The only columns we're really interested in our organization chart are these first three columns, the name, the role, and the manager. And what you'll notice is that this data is exactly the same as the data that we were using in the previous lesson when we built the organization chart manually. So let's close down this file and let's load up the organization chart wizard. So for this, I'm going to jump back into File. We're going to go to New and select Organization Chart. I'm going to keep this in metric units and click on Create. And this time we are going to use this organization chart wizard. Now on this first screen, I have two different options. I want to create my organization chart from information that's already stored in a file or database, or information that I enter using the wizard. So it's worth noting, if you want to enter in your information manually whilst you're using the wizard, you could select this second option. We have all of our information stored in an Excel worksheet, so we're going to use the first option and click on Next. We now need to specify where this information is stored, so what type of file. The first option we have is a Microsoft Exchange Server directory. So this is normally something like Outlook data. So if you want to use employee email addresses, things like that, then you could utilize this option. The third option that we have is an ODBC compliant data source. So that might be something like an Access database or another database, maybe an SQL server. But it's the middle option here that we're going to use, a text, org plus file, or an Excel file. Click on Next. Now I need to locate the file that I want to use, so the file that contains my information. So let's click on Browse, and here's my file, and click on Open. Make sure you have the correct language selected and click on Next. So what basically happens here is that Visio looks at the workbook and tries to figure out what the columns mean. And you can choose the columns in your data file that contains the correct information. So in the first one here, name, I can see that Visio has correctly picked up that that essentially maps to the name column in my Excel workbook. Now, if this was incorrect, I could click the drop down and it's going to show all of the column headings from my Excel spreadsheet, and I could just select the correct one. But in this case, it's picked it up correctly. It's also picked up reports to manager, and that is also correct. So I don't need to make any changes here. Now, if there is a first name column in your data, which there isn't in As, you can also check it's picked up in the correct first name option here as well. So I'm happy with how this looks. Let's click on Next. And now I can choose the columns or fields that I want to display. So again, on the left-hand side, I'm seeing my data file columns. And then on the right-hand side, I have the fields that I'm going to display in the organization chart. And Excel has correctly picked up that I want to display the name field. The role field provides the job title information, so I want to make sure that we show that, so let's click on Add to move that into the Displayed Fields section. Now, Manager, I don't actually want to show the manager because the managers are listed as separate names, so they're going to display anyway. I also don't want to include the employee number or the start date, so I just have two displayed fields. Let's click on Next. Now I have to choose the columns from my data file that I want to add to the organization shape. And for this, I only want the name and the role. Click on Next. At this stage, I could choose to import pictures from my computer or network location. So if I automatically wanted to add pictures into my organization chart, and I have those stored off in a folder, I could select this second option and then browse for that file. Now we're not going to do that at this stage, so I'm just going to select Don't Include Pictures in my organization chart and click on Next. In this part of the wizard, I need to give Visio some rules. So it says here, your organization data may contain too many employees to fit on one page of your drawing. You can specify how much of your organization to display on each page, or you can let the wizard define each page automatically. So if you want to specify it, you can select this first option. If you want the wizard to automatically break up your organization chart across pages, then you would select the second option. So let's go for this second option. Name at the top of the page. Well, I want the top executive to be at the top of the page. I have two other things down here. I can hyperlink employee shapes across pages and also synchronize employee shapes. Now, I'm not going to talk about this at this stage because we are going to look at this in more detail later on. So I'm just going to stick with the defaults here and then click on Finish. And this is what Visio comes up with. And looking at this, I can see that it fairly accurately reflects the correct hierarchy. Now, there is something that I can see here that isn't quite correct. And so I need to go in and make a bit of a manual change. So when it comes to Diane's PA, Peter, I can see that he's been placed down here on the same level as the other managers. So what I can do is right-click on Peter, and I can choose from the contextual menu, Change Position Type. So I'm going to change him from Position to Assistant. Now when I do that, it appears that nothing has actually happened. So what I need to do here is jump up to my Layout group and choose the Re-Layout option. And you can see that Visio reorganizes and corrects the chart. The only thing left for me to do here is go away and save this chart with a name, and then I'm pretty much done. That's it for this lesson. I will see you in the next one. Hello everyone and welcome back to the course. We've made it down to exercise 4. And I want to start out exercise 4 by showing you my answer. Now this is a very straightforward organization chart, but there are a couple of complications that might make you scratch your head. Now this organization chart has been created from a text file. And the names of the people in this organization are the same as the ones that we've already seen. The style of this organization chart is what we call a coin style, so I'd like you to use that. And we're not going to use an Excel workbook, we're using a text file. So let's look at the text file, which you'll find in the exercise files folder. So if you take a look at this text file, it's fairly straightforward. The first row contains the name of the data fields. So we have name, role, manager, employee number, and start date. Now, it's not particularly apparent when you look at this text file in Notepad where those tab characters are, but each of these fields is separated by a tab. So in between name and role, we have a tab, in between role and manager, so on and so forth. And the same in between each of the employees. Now, when you use the organization wizard, you should find that everything defaults to accepting this particular text file with these tab separators without you really having to do much at all. Now, for this first person here, Diane Dixon, we can see that here is her name. The next field along is role, so CEO is her role. The next field is manager. Now, Diane Dixon is the CEO, so essentially she doesn't have a manager. So instead of having something in here like the other people do, she just has another tab character. So just bear that in mind when you're doing this exercise. Now, when you're using the organization chart wizard, when you get to the part where it asks you if you want to include photos or pictures, make sure that you say yes. It will then ask you where the photos are stored and how you want to associate the pictures with a person in the organization chart. So you'll find all of the pictures that you need to use in the exercise files folder. And in order to map these correctly to the fields in the organization wizard, you're going to use the employee ID number. And that is this number here, the EMP number. And you should see that that corresponds to the corresponding photo for that person. So all you need to do is say that it's the EMP number that you want to use to match the name of the file. Now, there's one other thing to be aware of. When you get to the point in the wizard and it asks you which field do you need to show on the organization chart, and you specify role and name, it will ask which shape data you need to carry over. Now, you need to include the employee number in the shape data or it won't be able to match the photos. So quite a lot to this exercise. It's a little bit trickier than the ones that we've done in the past, but I am fairly confident that you're going to be able to do this. Now, we haven't spoken a great deal about shape data at the moment, but we are going to do that soon in this course, so everything will become a lot clearer. But give this your best shot. If you want to see my answer, you'll find that in the exercise files folder.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To get the course exercise files and follow along with this video, click over there. And click over there to watch more videos on YouTube from Simon Says It.